Hey guys, tonight we begin with something pretty grand, an absolutely unforgiving life in the Roman Empire, not as a senator, not as an emperor, no golden laurel crown, no marble baths tonight. You're not Julius Caesar. You dropped unprepared into a world of sandals, sewage, and state-sponsored crucifixion, so before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and let me know in the comments where you retuning in from and what time it is for you. It is always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world now. Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You open your eyes to the sounds of yelling chickens and a baby crying somewhere down the hall. Congratulations, they're just woken up in a Roman insula, the ancient version of an apartment building. Think of it as a multi-story death trap held together with dust prayer and very questionable architecture. Probably living on the third or fourth floor, which is bad. News: the higher the floor, the poorer the tenant, and the more likely your ceiling collapses when someone spills olive oil above you. Your room is small, no bigger than a walk-in closet, with stone walls that sweat in summer and freeze in winter. There's no window, just a little hole that lets in air, smoke, and the occasional pigeon. The mattress stuffed with straw and lice. The blanket smells like damp wool and regret. There's no furniture, no decorations, and certainly no kitchen. Cooking inside is forbidden. A small fire could ignite the whole building, and fire codes haven't been invented yet. Your only possessions are a clay cup, a worn-out tunic, and maybe a wooden comb. If you're feeling fancy, there's no toilet, not in your room, not in your building. Your chamber pot sits in the corner, silently judging you. You have to carry it down narrow, rickety stairs to empty it into the street gutter, hopefully without slipping and adding your body to the morning offerings. And the walls paper thin. You hear your neighbor praying, coughing, arguing with his wife, and unfortunately not arguing with his wife, if you catch my drift. The air is heavy with smoke, mildew, and the distinct perfume of unwashed humanity. Someone's already baking bread downstairs, but you're not invited. The street vendors are yelling prices for figs and fish guts. A distant centurion is barking orders at someone who is probably already bleeding. You're not even out the door yet, and you're sweating itchy and possibly inhaling lead dust from the plumbing. Welcome to the Roman workday. You're not an emperor. You're not a gladiator. You're just another poor soul in an overcrowded tenement, trying not to fall down the stairs or anger a city god before noon, and you've still got 23 hours to go now that survived the climb down the crooked stairs of your insula. It's time to address the second most urgent matter of the morning, your bladder. There's no bathroom in your apartment, of course, no sink, no flush, not even a bucket with dignity instead. You shuffle down the street, chamber pot in one hand, modesty in the other, toward the nearest latrina, Rome's version of a public restroom, and calling it public is generous. It's a social club for strangers who don't mind making eye contact while doing their business. You arrive to find a long stone bench with holes cut into it. Beneath the bench, a shallow trough flows with water, just enough to carry away the collective shame of the city. As lower classes, you sit, if you dare, and hope the person beside you doesn't want to chat. Privacy, not a thing. Doors, absolutely not people. Treat it like a town square with extra acoustics. Businessmen discuss grain prices while squatting. A retired soldier talks about his sciatica. Meanwhile, you just trying not to look directly across from you, where another man is chewing olives and not breaking eye contact. Then comes the real treat, the Trisorium. It is a communal sponge on a stick, kept in a bucket of vinegar or salt water in theory. You rinse it before use in practice. Well, let's just say the sponge has seen things, unspeakable things. You wipe hesitantly and hope the vinegar did its job. If you're feeling lucky, maybe you brought your own rag. If you're feeling rich, maybe some moss, but chances are you just used what everyone else used and now carry the quiet shame of shared hygiene. And if you think you can skip this ritual by going in an alley Think again, public urination laws exist, fines are real, and Roman law enforcement is not known for subtle warnings. Once you're done, you wash your hands. Wait, no. There's no soap, no running water. Just a rinse from the communal basin that's seen more fingers than a handshake. Competition, you leave the latrina feeling lighter and slightly more dead inside. But hey, that's Rome, and now it's time for breakfast. If you can call it that, so you've done your morning business and managed not to fall into a gutter or get arrested impressive. Now it's time for breakfast, the most important meal of the day, unless you read better. Romang, in which case it's more of a polite formality before work and misery. Welcome to the Iron Taculum. A Roman morning feast that consists of precisely two things: stale bread and watered down wine sometimes. There's cheese, sometimes there's olives, but mostly there's just disappointment. Forget about coffee, the Romans didn't have it. No eggs, no bacon, no pancakes, and certainly no oat milk lattes. Breakfast is not meant to be satisfying, it's meant to not kill you. Your bread is likely panis rusticus, a rough, chewy lump of grain and grit baked. Yesterday or the day before, it's dense enough to qualify as a weapon and textured like limestone. The wine is diluted, because even they knew that being drunk. Before sunrise in ancient Rome was a bad idea unless you were a senator. There's no kitchen in your apartment. So you eat this meal standing in the street or squatting beside a fountain alongside other equally unenthused citizens gnawing on bread like flavorless tree bark if you've got a bit of oil or a smear of garum. Rome's famously salty fermented fish sauce, then congratulations, they added aromatic horror to your already bleak meal. If you're wealthy, maybe you get fruit or honey, but you're not, you're normal. Roman citizen, just rich enough to not be enslaved, and just poor enough to envy your neighbor's broken jug of goat milk. Sometimes vendors walk by selling hot chickpea fritters or honey pastries, and for a moment, you feel hope, but you remember your coin pouch is emptier than a gladiator's sympathy, so you bite your bread and pretend it is cake. And this is how the day starts, with carbs, mild dehydration, and a growing realization that you're about to walk 7 miles on Roman sandals with nothing but stale crumbs in your stomach and a buzz from last night's leftover wine. It doesn't get better, because now it's time to go to work. After your hearty breakfast of bread and mild despair, it's time to face the Roman workday. And let's be clear, unless you're a senator, a poet with a patron, or one of the lucky few who inherited land from a dead uncle with no heirs, you are working, and you're redoing it hard. You might be a laborer, porter, potter, bricklayer, street cleaner, or if your luck's truly sour, a sewer worker. Rome needs a lot of things: roads, aqueducts, temples, baths, and someone has to build them. That someone, you with your bare hands under the sun wearing sandals that provide all the arch support of a soggy leaf. The Roman workday starts early, very early. The sun is barely up, but the foreman already is yelling in Latin and waving a stick if you're late your doctor days. Pay or worse, beaten, shamed, or fired, which in Roman terms means you starve with honor. Your tools are basic. You dig with a shovel made of splinters and prayer carry bricks on your back and haul water from a cistern that smells like old socks. And ambition, there are no gloves, no helmets, just sweat dust and the constant awareness that one slip might crush your spine and your career simultaneously. And if you're a craftsman, good luck. You recompeting with hundreds of others selling the same clay pot sandals or cheap tunics. Underpricing is common, and quality doesn't matter if a richer citizen decides he doesn't like your face. Even more elevated jobs like messenger, accountant, or teacher aren't glamorous. You're either running through Rome's chaotic streets with scrolls under your arm, writing numbers for someone who will forget your name, or trying to teach Latin to a group of senators' children who already think they re-gods. Women, they're working too, spinning, weaving, selling vegetables, or managing stalls in the markets. Plus raising children, plus managing the household, plus not dying during childbirth. Multitasking before it was cool. And after all this, you get a short break for lunch. Maybe if your supervisor isn't in a bad mood or trying to impress a visiting prefect, so yes, you work or you die trying Rome. Maybe eternal, but your back won't be, so you've made it through the morning without fainting or being flogged. Now it's time to navigate the ancient. Roman Street, a chaotic, crowded gauntlet designed by someone who clearly hated personal space and public health. Picture it, the sun's high, the city's buzzing, and the street is alive, not in a poetic way, in a literal way. Rats, flies, stray dogs, livestock, beggars, merchants yelling in 6 languages. Children running wild, thieves pretending to help old ladies while pocketing your coin purse. It's like Times Square if Times Square had no plumbing and everyone was carrying a... Go, let's talk infrastructure, Ramam roads where engineering marvels. Perfectly straight, masterfully paved, and usually overflowing with a blend of urine, spilled wine, vomit, animal waste, and the remains of last night. Scarum Source, the middle of the street, functions as an open sewer step off the raised footpath. Without looking, and congratulations, you've just baptized your sandal in the holy waters of human. Misery wagons clatter by with no speed limits, no crosswalks, and zero chill. They don't stop for pedestrians, in fact. Roman law actually banned heavy cart traffic during the day in the city, which means drivers race through at night in the dark. Without brakes like charioteers on a deadline, if you're not crushed by wheels, you'll be bumped by elbows baskets or an angry fishmonger shouting about spoiled eels. Then there's the air thick with smoke from cooking fires, incense from temples, the scent of public latrines wafting on the breeze. Oh, and dead animals. Sometimes people just leave them there. If a dog drops in the forum, someone might just toss a cloth over it and walk away and do and forget public spectacles, spontaneous brawls, impromptu protests, or a politician's parade that blocks traffic for hours while trumpet players blast off key fanfare in your face. So yes, the Roman street is alive and out to get you slip on a fig, get hit with a runaway cart, or accidentally offend a patrician's pet monkey and your day. Could end faster than Caesar on the Ides of March, and you were just trying to go buy lentils. You re-sweaty, dusty, and desperately craving a splash of something cold, the good news you live in. Rome, a city renowned for its aqueducts, those magnificent engineering marvels that carry fresh water from the hills, straight into the heart of the empire, the bad news that water doesn't care about you unless you re-wealthy enough to live in a dais with your own private fountain. You re-sharing water with thousands of your closest coughing, sneezing, not washing their hands neighbors. Your options are the public fountains where everyone fills their jars, washes their feet, and occasionally dunks a child for fun or hygiene. And by hygiene, we mean a wet version of hope. If you want to wash up, your best option is the thermi. The Roman public baths, they're everywhere, and everyone uses them. Sounds civilized, right? But here's the thing, the water cycles through multiple pools. With no soap, no chlorine, and very little shame, you will be sitting in a tepid bath with a dozen other men, none of whom believe in modesty. Conversations are loud, political, and occasionally naked. Man might try to sell you socks while another cleans his ears with a stick and the water it's been through. Everyone. If you were hoping to feel clean, think again. You're marinating in bacteria with a hint of eucalyptus. Also fun fact, the plumbing system often uses lead pipes. Yes, lead Romans were obsessed with engineering, but not chemistry. Over time, that convenient indoor plumbing could cause all kinds of delightful side effects like anemia, gout, infertility, and if you're truly lucky, madness. Want to drink something safer, wine. Seriously, water is viewed with suspicion, especially in the poorer districts where contamination from latrines and street runoff is common, so wine is diluted and consumed throughout the day by men, women, and children alike, because what better way to survive a crumbling empire than with a gentle buzz? So yes, Rome brought water into the city before most of the world knew what a pipe was, but for the average citizen, it's a gamble every time you drink, bathe, or rinse your toes. Enjoy your aqueducts. Just don't trust them. Welcome to the Roman Empire, where pain isn't just a possibility, it's the background music of your entire life. You stub your toe, no ice, no painkillers. You grit your teeth and keep going until it either heals wrong or falls off. Break a bone, you wrap it in a dirty rag and try not to breathe. Too hard, get a splinter, good luck. That's how infections start and how you might end. Roman society isn't big on comfort. There are no ergonomic tools, no padded seats, no concept of taking it easy. If you're a laborer, you're lifting bricks with a hernia and a prayer. If you're a soldier, you march 20 meters a day with bleeding feet and a scorpion bite on your thigh. If you real woman in childbirth, well, welcome to agony, your midwife might know a chant that is about it. Every part of your body is one. Misstep away from becoming an open wound or a cautionary tale, and unless you live near a temple with a very dedicated priest, your best option is homemade ointments, herbal smoke, or simply ignoring the problem until it resolves itself, or you get resolved into a grave. There's no such thing as anesthesia surgeries are performed while you scream into a block of wood dislocated shoulder. It's popped back in by a man named Marcus, who learned from watching someone else fail at it. Dental work. Picture a blacksmith. Now picture your mouth. That's the scene. And if you're enslaved or poor people, don't even pretend to care. You could be bleeding out on the side of the road. And the best you'll get is do and stain the mosaic, even upper class. Romans embraced pain as proof of virtue. Stoicism was the philosophy of the day. Enduring suffering without complaint was seen as noble. If you cried over a broken arm, you weren't just in pain, you were weak. Real Romans suffer silently then. Write poetry about it later. So yes, pain is always on the table, and it usually comes without warning, without remedy, and definitely without sympathy. On that cheerful note, let's take a look at what happens when you actually go see a Roman doctor. So you hurt yourself. Maybe it was the infected blister from yesterday's work, or maybe you tried to shave with a bronze blade and now your chin looks like a gladiator training ground. Either way, it's time to seek medical attention, which in ancient Rome is less about healing and more about surviving the attempt. Let's begin with the basics. Roman medicine is a chaotic mix of Greek theory, mystical guesswork, and a surprising amount of leaves the core. Belief the body is ruled by four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Feeling off one of them is out of balance. The solution drains something, so your doctor, who may or may not also be your barber, immediately reaches for the leeches or a knife, because bloodletting is the default treatment for everything from migraines to moral failings. Have a cough, let's open a vein. Depressed, we'll just drain some sadness out of your arm. Surgery, oh yes, it exists. Roman surgeons had scalpels, forceps, and even bone drills. What they didn't have were anesthetics. You stay conscious through the whole procedure, gripping the edge of a wooden table, while a man in a dirty toga digs into your flesh with the confidence of someone who once saw a scroll about it. Antiseptics, not really a thing. They might wash wounds with wine or vinegar, which does help, but also burns like divine punishment. Infection is a common side effect. So is death. Prescriptions vary wildly. You might be given honey, garlic, crushed beetles, or a pus made of herbs, ash, and very specific types of animal dung if things get worse. You're advised to sleep in a temple, pray to Asclepius, and hope divine dreams will deliver your cure. And if none of it works, well, your doctor shrugs, your family lights a candle, and your neighbors start whispering about what kind of omen your death might be at. Not that Romans didn't care about health. They just hadn't quite figured out what helped and what murdered you more efficiently. So next time you sneeze, be grateful for modern antibiotics and that you don't live in a world where healing often starts with blood loss after a long day of sweating, bleeding, and dodging carts. You're starving kind for dinner, or as the Romans called it, cena. Just don't expect anything remotely comforting. Let's start with what is not on the table. No pizza, no pasta, no tomatoes, no chocolatitos, no sugar, and absolutely no coffee. None of those things had been discovered or imported yet. This is an Italian cuisine. This is pre-Italy edible survival. You sit down to a wooden bowl of something brown and vaguely hot. It as probably pulse. A porridge made of spelt beans or lentils. It tastes like wet gravel with a hint of herb. If you're lucky. If you're not lucky, it tastes like wet gravel without the herb. Protein is rare, unless you caught it, trapped it, or fished it yourself. Meat is expensive, and even when you do get some, it's often off Roman. Cooking didn't use refrigeration, so preservation meant heavy salting, smoking, or marinating it in garum, a fermented fish sauce that smells like dead ocean and burns. Your soul, just thinking about it, if you were feeling festive, there might be boiled vegetables, hard cheese, or the occasional fig rich. Romans dined on exotic dishes, like roasted flamingo stuffed dormice or jellyfish and vinegar delicacies that mostly scream, look at how rich I am and how little I care about taste buds. Your wine is watered down, always drinking it straight, is seen as barbaric, but do it worry the water it's mixed with is probably questionable. Too, so you're just choosing how fast you want. To get sick dessert, maybe dried fruit, maybe nuts, or maybe you're fasting because it as a feast day. Honoring a god who frowns on gluttony either way, you're not ending the night with a tiramisu. There are no napkins, you wipe your hands on a cloth shared with 10 other people, or just use your tunic and pretend it's clean. By the end of the meal, your stomach is full but uneasy, and your breath smells like garlic wine and slight despair, but at least you're fed now. All you have to do is survive the Roman nightlife, and trust me, that's not a relaxing stroll after a long day of grime. Toil and fish sauce, you might be hoping for a little leisure, something to take your mind off your crumbling apartment and the open sewer outside. Well, good news, you're in Rome, where entertainment is everywhere bad. News, most of it is horrifying. Let's start with the main event, the Colosseum, the crown jewel of Roman engineering. And the place where your soul quietly dies, this is where crowds gather to watch men stab each other for sport, wild animals devour criminals, and sometimes, if the emperor is feeling dramatic, reenact full naval battles with real water and real drowning. It's free to attend, which sounds generous until you realize it as free because the state wants you distracted while the Senate raises taxes and quietly annexes Armenia. You sit packed between sweaty strangers, cheering as a gladiator loses a limb. There's blood, sand, and occasional public executions with extra flair, clapping, you're not sure why, feeling a little sensitive, prefer theater, head to the amphitheater for a Roman play, maybe a tragedy written in Latin you barely understand, or a fast soy, the punchline involves someone pretending to defile Jupiter with a sausage. Subtlety is not the Roman strong suit. If you're feeling sporty, try the Circus Maximus chariot races, are fast, thrilling, and regularly fatal. There are no guardrails, no helmets, and lots of shouting. Crashes are inevitable and spectacular, and the crowd loves if they rehear for the violence and the betting, do and cheer for the wrong team, unless you're ready to fight your way home. And then there's the street. Entertainment, fire breathers, acrobats, musicians, con artists, and the occasional philosophical rant from a barefoot man with nothing to lose. If you don't like the show, wait 5 minutes. Something else or someone else will start yelling, but behind all of it, there's a strange, brilliant madness. Rome didn't just distract its people, it dazzled them into forgetting how brutal daily life was. It weaponized spectacle, and if that doesn't numb you enough, there's always more wine now. Let's take a walk through. Justice Roman style spoiler, it's not comforting. You've survived work dinner and a gladiator getting impaled for applause. You might think you're safe now, that as long as you keep your head down, the law will protect you. Ah, that's adorable. And Rome, the law doesn't protect it, reminds you that you small replaceable, and that mercy is a luxury reserved for statues of emperors. First off, legal status matters. If you're a citizen, you have rights in theory. You can't be flogged in public unless someone important gets really annoyed and you get a proper trial. If you're non-citizen, justice comes in the form of a fist, a branding iron, or a swift execution outside the city gates. Slaves, they are property. If a slave murders their master, even if the master deserved it, every slave in the household might be executed just to send a message. That message, don't even think about it. If you're accused of a crime, don't expect a calm chat with a lawyer. Trials of public theater, the wealthier party brings witnesses, bribes, and dramatic gestures. You bring your tunic and a sinking feeling. If you cry on cue, that might help if you have no patrons, pray to. Jupiter and hope the magistrate isn't hung over punishments. Are designed not just to hurt, but to deter thieves, can be branded or have their hands broken. Liars might get their tongue pierced, fraud, public flogging, or exile. If you're lucky and if you insult the emperor, it's not jail time, it's death, usually creative. Some crimes require public punishment, ideally in front of a crowd that cheers louder than they did for the morning's beheading. Crucifixion is popular, long, slow, humiliating. It isn't reserved just for Jesus. It's the go-to for rebels, robbers, and anyone the state wants to make an example of. And remember, law enforcement isn't there to help the vigil czar. Rome's version of firefighters and police, underpaid, overworked, and often corrupt. If you're mugged, they might shrug. If you bribe them, they might help you mug someone else. So yes, Rome has laws written in stone, recited in forums, but they serve power, not justice. Now let's talk about gods, because you're not just obeying men here, you're on Jupiter's turf. After surviving the streets and dodging Roman justice, you may hope to find comfort in religion. A little peace, a little personal spirituality. Nope, not here in the Roman Empire. Religion isn't a private affair. It's an institution, an ever-present cloud of incense and obligation, wrapped around every waking moment of your life. You don't choose your gods, they choose you, and there are so many. There's a god for everything. Door hinges, cardia sewers, Clochina boundaries, terminus, and even mildew. Robus, you can't walk 5 paces without crossing a shrine. If you don't pause to bow, light a candle, or mutter a prayer, you're not just being rude, you're inviting catastrophe. Maybe not today, but eventually. And when your roof collapses, everyone will nod and say, ah, yes, he skipped the Saturnalia offering religious. Festivals fill the calendar, dozens per year. On those days, business stops, animals are sacrificed, and the air smells like roasting bull and wet marble. You attend out of piety, but also fear, because if the gods aren't honored properly, they'll retaliate with plagues, droughts, or a really bad harvest that ruins everyone's lentil supply now. Let's talk about emperor worship. The state wants you to revere the emperor, not just as a ruler, but as a living god. You're expected to offer incense at his altar, sing his praises, and never roll your eyes during a triumphal procession. That's treason adjacent if you were caught not participating in public worship. Say you're a little too quiet during the Vestilia, or you didn't show up to toss grain into the temple flame, you could be labeled impious, atheistic, or worst of all, suspicion. And Rome is like blood and shark-infested waters, and if you were part of a foreign cult, you'd better keep that under wraps unless it's officially approved. The state doesn't like unfamiliar gods unless they bring wine, taxes, or new soldiers. Roman religion isn't about belief, it's about ritual. You don't have to feel it. You just have to do it correctly, on time, and in public, and you better smile while you sacrifice that goat. Speaking of social performance, let's climb the greasy pole of Roman ambition. In the next chapter, you bowed to the gods, avoided a lawsuit, and survived a public bath without contracting something mythical. But here comes the most exhausting part of Roman life, the social hierarchy. A brutal, finely tuned machine where every word, gesture, and sandal strap placement could make or break you. Roman society is a ladder, but is covered in oil and lined with daggers. At the top are the senator's old money. Toggers with purple stripes and land ownership so vast it has its own postal code below them. The equestrians, the wealthy. Business class, then come the plebeians like you, the struggling middle and lower classes below that, freedmen, slaves, foreigners, and the guy who accidentally insulted a statue of Augustus. Once want to move up, you'll need patrons, powerful individuals who protect you in exchange for lifelong loyalty, errands, favors, and the occasional vote. It's like having a boss, godfather, and landlord rolled into one charmingly condescending package. Each morning, you visit your patron S home. As part of the solutio, you wait in line with other clients, praise his haircut, maybe compliment his son's toga, then beg for a favor. Usually money, food, or a recommendation. If you're lucky, he tosses you a coin and lets You carry his litter through the forum. Congratulations, you're now connected. Every move you make is watched and judged. You're close. Must be clean, not fashionable, just clean. Your speech must be proper, your friends carefully selected, and whatever you do. Don't show ambition that makes people nervous. If you rise too quickly, others will conspire to knock. You back down socially or literally. Networking is warfare. Gossip is currency. The wrong comment at a banquet can end your career. The right marriage can save your entire bloodline. But you better play it carefully. Love is for poets. The rest of Rome marries for alliances and estate. Access, and even if you climb high, don't get too comfortable. One bad harvest, one misritual, one jealous rival, and it's all over. You won't even hear the dagger coming now. The sun is setting. Surely things calm down at night, right? Not in Rome. The sun dips below the rooftops of Rome, and for a fleeting moment you think, maybe now, finally you can rest. But nightfall in the Roman Empire isn't a time for peace. It's a shift in tone from noisy and chaotic to dark and downright lethal. First, let's talk about lighting. There isn't any, unless you're rich enough to burn oil lamps all night, and few or most people rely on moonlight memory and blind hope to find their way through the labyrinthine alleys of the city. If you trip and fall, no one is helping. They might just take your shoes. The vigils, Rome's official night watchmen, are supposed to patrol the streets, prevent fires, and stop crimes in practice. They're overworked, underpaid, and often more interested in napping than heroics. Some are brave, most are bribable, and all of them are. Outnumbered criminals know this. Thieves, muggers, and the occasional bored ex-gladiator roam the shadows looking for easy marks. If you're walking home alone, you're the easy mark. It doesn't matter who you are unless you're armed fast or invisible, you're at risk. And then there's fire. Rome's greatest nighttime terror in Suli, those charming death trap apartments you sleep in are made of wood, and dreams cooking after dark is illegal for this reason. But laws mean little to a hungry tenant. A single overturned lamp can reduce an entire block to ash in hours. The Great Fire of 64 CE didn't start itself, but once it did, it raged like Mars in a bad mood. You might think your building is safe until you smell smoke at midnight and realize there is no organized evacuation plan. You grab your one tunic, your chamber pot, and maybe your dignity and sprint for your life down a collapsing staircase. And if it's not fire or thieves, it's noise, drunken parties echo through the streets, processions for obscure gods parade by with drums and shouting. And if a senator's mistress is upset, everyone within a 3-block radius knows sleep and ancient. Rome is a luxury. Silence is a myth, and safety that's reserved for the wealthy, the armed, and the extraordinarily lucky. But hey, morning's almost here. You just have to survive one more night and then repeat. The sun sets on Rome, and with it, you might expect a moment of calm, a breeze, a quiet meal maybe. Even sleep. Think again. Rome doesn't go silent at night. It simply shifts into something darker, louder, and more dangerous. The city never truly sleeps, it prowls. Let's start with fire. Roman buildings, especially the tall wooden insuli where the poor live, are tinder boxes waiting for a careless oil lamp or cooking fire to turn them into ash there. Us no real fire department, just the vigils who are part firefighter, part night watch, part deeply underpaid janitor. They carry buckets and hope if your apartment catches fire, you might be rescued, or you might become a cautionary tale in tomorrow's gossip. Then there are the thieves, cut purses, and pickpockets who treat the moonlight like a hunting license. Rome's alleys are narrow, and unlit torches are expensive if you must walk after dark. You're doing so by feel, by instinct, and hopefully not by yourself. Don't carry anything shiny. Don't make eye contact, and whatever you do, don't get caught between two drunken gladiators arguing about someone's missing sandals. Speaking of drunk, the city's nightlife is booming. Taverns spill over with cheap wine, loud music, and men shouting bad poetry about Mars and women. They'll never impress. Fights break out, dice games end in blood, and sometimes an angry noble decides to settle a grudge by having a slave beat someone in the street. You hide in the shadows and pretend You didn't see anything if you're a woman walking alone. Good luck. Rome is not kind to unchaperoned females after dark. The streets belong to the desperate, the reckless, and the dangerously bored. Trying to sleep isn't much better, your insula cax. Like it's thinking about collapsing rats scurry. Through the walls, your neighbor coughs like a dying goat somewhere nearby. Someone is screaming either from passion murder, or both you press your face to a sweaty pillow and pray to Mercury for silence, but there is no silence in Rome. Not for you, because in the Roman Empire, even the darkness is loud, and when dawn comes, you'll have to do it all again, you. Woke up in a crumbling insula, survived public toilets, chariot traffic, gladiator, gore-led, poisoning, leeches, religious festivals, burning rooftops, and half-cooked lentils soaked in fermented fish sauce. You bowed to gods, you don't understand, obeyed laws that don't protect you, and slept through riots, rats, and the occasional public decapitation. You're dirty, tired, possibly infected, and emotionally scarred by the communal sponge, and it's only been one day. Would you last another, honestly? No, you wouldn't. Most modern humans with our air conditioning, antibiotics, and 5-minute delivery windows would crumble by lunchtime. You'd give up before the second round of Garhem, and yet the Romans did it for centuries, because here's the maddening, magnificent thing in the middle of all. This filth, brutality, and noise, Rome worked somehow. They built cities, roads, aqueducts, libraries, temples, and amphitheaters. They expanded their empire across continents. They administered laws, developed philosophy, mapped the stars, performed surgeries, and created systems that shaped Europe and beyond. For 2,000 years, Latin became the root of half the languages you hear today. Their architecture inspired cathedrals, parliaments, and college campuses. Their political concepts, republics, senates, veto powers still echo through modern democracies, but it came at a cost for the average Roman, not the emperors, not the marble-bathed elite daily. Life was a hard-fought grind, and yet they endured, they adapted, they didn't have a choice, because Rome wasn't made of gold, it was made of sweat, fear, ambition, and survival, layer by layer, person by person, century by bloody century, and that's why it lasted you. You'd be begging to go back to modern plumbing and antihistamines by mid-afternoon. You detrade your entire denarii pouch for a hot shower and a chair with a back on it, and that's okay. You don't need to survive ancient Rome, you just need to understand it and maybe, just maybe, appreciate that someone somewhere once walked those same filthy streets and helped build the empire. So you could sit here today clean, safe, and mildly horrified. Imagine being a Pathian princess in the 2nd century BCE. You got real blood in your veins, a name fit for legend, Radagon, and more. Importantly, you live in a world where your family spends more time fighting rebels than hosting dinner parties. Radagon wasn't born into peace and pearls. She was born into grit, horses, and the constant possibility that someone might poison your dates. Her father, Mithrates II, was no idle king. He was the one who expanded Parthia from a dusty fringe kingdom into a formidable empire that would one day spar with Rome. But expansion comes with problems, namely rebellions, betrayals, and those neighbors who just won't accept that your army now owns their backyard as a young woman. Radagon would have grown up watching envoys argue commanders, draw maps in the sand, and palace scribes, trying to keep track of who was loyal this week. She wasn't trained just in silk and ceremony. She learned statcraft, command presence, and how to wear armor that didn't clash with her earrings. It is important to understand the role of Pathian women here. While not always given the spotlight, Pathian noble women were no strangers to power. Some ruled cities, others plotted dynastic alliances, and a few, like Radagon, became legends not for who they married, but for who they defeated and defeat. She did, but that part comes later at this point in her life. Roden's name was already known. She was a symbol not just of royal lineage, but of Pathian pride. She carried with her the expectation that she'd either marry a king or become one in spirit. She didn't seem content with sitting on the sidelines while cities burned or provinces rebelled, while most royal ladies were being oiled and perfumed. Radagon was likely brushing up on military reports and court logistics. She had no time for vanity. And as fate would have it, she would one day make a vow that involved not washing her hair until a rebellion was crushed. Spoiler alert, it took a while. But before we get to that dusty crown moment, we need to understand what kind of rebellion dares provoke a princess who would rather lead troops than wear gold. The Parthian Empire, grand as it appeared on a map, was more duct tape than marble, stretching from the Persian Gulf to the edges of Mesopotamia, and beyond it was stitched together by marriages, oaths, and the occasional sword pressed firmly against someone's neck. So when a rebellion flared up in the western provinces, likely in Media or Babylonia, it wasn't exactly surprising. What was surprising was how bold the rebels were. These weren't just disgruntled tax evaders, these were full-blown aristocrats and city leaders. Angry at the central power and perhaps emboldened by the young age or absence of a male royal enforcer, they didn't just throw a fit. They took fortresses, silenced Parthian envoys, and essentially told the crown to go polish its own sandals now under ordinary circumstances. The king would have dispatched a general, or a cousin with too much ambition and too little brains, but these weren't ordinary circumstances for reasons still debated by historians. Maybe timing, maybe logistics, maybe sheer royal defiance. Radagon herself took command, and not just in the abstract. I'll approve the battle plans kind of way. No, she got on a horse, donned armor, and made a public vow that would become the stuff of legend. She would not wash, comb, or otherwise tend to her hair until the rebellion was crushed. It was bold, it was dramatic, it was frankly a nightmare for court stylists. But that vow, dramatic as it sounds, wasn't vanity. It was a declaration, a visual symbol that tied her personal dignity to the fate of the empire. Every time someone saw her tangled, dust-laden hair, they'd be reminded, this isn't over until we win. And that worked. Soldiers rallied. The troops didn't just see a princess, they saw a commander who was literally letting her beauty decay with the war. She embodied Parthian resilience, the kind that didn't rely on thrones, but on thorns, dust, and sweat. Meanwhile, the rebels probably didn't know whether to laugh or panic. They had expected a general, maybe a diplomat instead. They got a furious, unwashed woman who was riding straight for their gates with steel in her eyes and no time for conditioner. And worse, she meant business when Radagon set out from the capital. She was escorted by a lavish court parade or showered in rose petals. She was accompanied by cavalry grit and the weight of an empire that needed its rebels. Squashed like an overripe fig, and she looked the part. Gone were any signs of courtly delicacy. Her hair, famously unkempt, began to take on a life of its own, hanging like a banner of warden determination. In a world obsessed with appearances, she turned her own into a weapon. The campaign was not swift. This wasn't a single siege, easily resolved with a bribe and a battering ram. The rebel cities were fortified and confident. They had expected hesitation from the central power. Not a battle-hardened woman galloping through the dust with fire in her gaze, but Radagon didn't waver. Her military instincts were sharp, perhaps sharper than many of the men who had led before her. She employed classic Parthian strategies, mobility, feigned retreats, and hit-and-run raids. Her forces would appear at the edge of a rebel-held city, vanish like smoke, and return a day later from an unexpected flank. Reports suggest her soldiers admired her, not just as a symbol, but as a tactician. She didn't ride behind the lines. She was up front, dirt under her nails and fury under her helmet. And as the weeks dragged on, so did her hair. It said that by the third month, the strands had begun to knot into ropes full of dust and sweat and the whispers of battlefield prayers, but that only made her more terrifying to her enemies and more revered by her men. Rebels called her the Witch Queen, not because she practiced magic, but because no noble woman should still be fighting in the field and refusing a bath. Surely they reasoned something unnatural was at work, but there was nothing magical about it, just sheer unrelenting discipline. By the time her army laid siege to the final rebel holdout, the legend had grown faster than the rebellion had in taverns and tents. Alike soldiers joked that the enemy wasn't afraid of Pathayan swords. They were afraid Rodigan would never wash again, and truth be told, they weren't entirely wrong. The last stronghold of the rebellion loomed ahead, a walled city rumored to be impenetrable, where the rebel leaders had dug in like ticks on a dog. Supplies had been hoarded, archers lined the parapets, and the gates had been reinforced with the kind of smug confidence only traitors possess. They believed they could outlast. Roden big mistake by now. Her appearance was legend. Word had spread not just through the empire, but into enemy territory. The woman who won't wash, they whispered, has arrived. Some said her hair had turned to iron. Others claimed she hadn't slept in weeks. The myths piled up like siege ladders, but Rodigon was no myth. She was real, and she had tactics. Instead of launching a reckless assault, she opted for a slow, punishing siege. Cut off trade routes, intercept messengers, poison wells. The rebels had braced for a battle of swords. Instead, they got starvation. She weaponized time itself, letting her enemies rot from the inside out, and all the while she camped outside the city with her soldiers. Just another commander beneath the canvas tents. She shared their meals, gritty bread and lukewarm wine. She inspected their armor, she led patrols, and she still, despite every opportunity, refused to so much as touch a comb for her soldiers. The vow had become sacred. No one dared suggest she break it, even in jest. It had become a living embodiment of Pathayan pride, a symbol that their suffering wasn't for nothing. Every tangled strand was a reminder we are still in this fight inside. The rebel city morale crumbled. They had expected to demoralize the enemy by holding out instead. It was they who began to wither. Their own commanders began to argue food. Rambo, rumors of desertion began to ripple like cracks through stone, and then came the breaking point. A small gate left unguarded for just an hour, perhaps out of fatigue. Perhaps sabotage was found by one of Rodigon's scouts that night under the cover of darkness, and wind her forces slipped in and opened the main gates from within. By morning, the city was hers, and Rodigon, face stir with sweat and ash, stood atop the battlements. Unbathed, victorious, and utterly terrifying victory was not declared with trumpets or parades. It was declared with water after months of dust battle and relentless pursuit. Rodigon stood before her army, not in royal robes, but in the same battlefield garb she had worn since the campaign began. Her armor bore dents from rebel blades. Her face was lined from sun and strain, and her hair, her wild, matted, filthy hair, now hung down her back like a lion's mane made of wire and legend. But she had done it. Every rebel city had fallen. Every oathbreaker had been brought low, and now with her vow complete, she could finally do what no one in the empire had dared attempt to rush. She could wash her hair according to tradition, and later accounts passed down through oral history. Rodigon summoned her servants not to a golden chamber, but to a public courtyard. She wanted her soldiers, the ones who bled beside her, to witness this moment. Basins were filled, oils were warmed, combs were retrieved from storage like sacred relics, and then under the open sky, the warrior princess of Pathia, caked in the grime of war, began to scrub away months of rebellion. It was symbolic. Every tangle undone was another city reclaimed. Every rinse of water over her scalp washed away defiance, soaked into the earth, as if the land itself had been restored. Some say she wept, others say she laughed, but what no one disputed was the silence among the troops as they watched hardened men, scarred and sunburned, stood like statues as Rodigon emerged from her ritual. Transformed, no crown was placed on her head. She didn't need one. The dust had become her diadem. The act of not washing had become more powerful than any jewel, and in that moment, Pathia didn't just have a princess, it had a symbol. She could have returned to court in triumph, let the scribes compose flattering odes, allowed nobles to fall over themselves in praise, but she didn't rush back to luxury. She stayed with her troops a while longer. She dined with them, she listened to them. She knew that her legend had just begun, but she didn't want it forged in gold. She wanted it forged in memory. After the hair washing that became an event for the ages, Roden could have ridden straight to the capital with fanfare, banners, and enough propaganda to last a century, but she didn't instead. She took the long route back, deliberately visiting the cities. She had reclaimed one by one, walking their streets, inspecting their defenses, and ensuring no embers of rebellion still glowed beneath the ashes. This wasn't mere ceremony, it was strategy. Radagon knew the danger of victory, how quickly it can melt into complacency. Empires don't fall from defeat alone, they fall from forgetting why they fought in the first place. She wanted the rebels and loyalists alike to understand that Pathian's strength wasn't just cavalry and coin, it was embodied in her very presence. A woman who chose hardship over comfort and earned loyalty by example, not decree and loyalty she received. Everywhere she went, people gathered not to gawk at royalty, but to stare in awe at her, not polished, not perfumed, but real. She didn't bring fear. She brought accountability. She asked for reports, heard complaints, paid for supplies out of her own war coffers. She rewarded cities that had stayed loyal and offered clemency carefully, cautiously to those who repented. By the time she reached the royal court, her return had already become a legend. Scribes rushed to record her tale. Artists argued over how to capture her wild-haired and battle-worn, or radiant and reborn. Ministers whispered about the implications, a woman commanding armies, keeping oaths, and now standing at the heart of Pathian power with the loyalty of half the provinces in her hand. And here was the dilemma. What do you do with a princess who is more popular than most kings? Some urged she be married off, as if that would contain her influence. Others wanted her placed in charge of border defenses permanently, but Radagon didn't seem concerned with titles or politics. She had proven what she needed to the battlefield had been her throne, the dust her crown, and her name already etched in the hearts of soldiers and citizens alike needed no royal inscription to endure. She didn't need a coronation. She had already been crowned not with gold, but with history in the months following her campaign. Radagon didn't seek the limelight, but it followed her anyway. She became a subject of poetry, sculpture, gossip, and awe, not because she demanded it, but because she had earned it. Every soldier who defought under her command returned with a tale, and every tale made her larger, more enduring, more untouchable. Yet in the palace halls of Pathia, where politics slithered like snakes behind silk curtains, her silence was unnerving. She didn't boast, she didn't lobby, she didn't ask for titles or lands. Instead, she observed, listened, and understood the real battlefield had only shifted from stone walls to whispered conversations. Even the king, her father, or possibly her brother, depending on the exact moment in the tangled Pathian dynastic timeline, had to tread carefully. Radagon wasn't just popular. She was respected in a way few men at court could compete with, not adored for beauty or bloodline, but for leadership, for command. She had turned her vow into policy, her filth into folklore, and yet the silence she kept was as deliberate as any military maneuver. She didn't tell others what she planned next because perhaps even she didn't know. For the first time in years, she wasn't fighting, she wasn't commanding troops or outwitting rebels. She was still, and that stillness unnerved many. What does a woman who conquered without a crown do next? One theory among historians is that Rodan used this silence as leverage. Her presence alone, her every quiet nod or glance forced decisions. Officials hesitated to propose bad policy for fear she'd frown. Generals delayed campaigns, hoping she might win. Her silence wasn't passive, it was a tool. She had discovered that not speaking could be more powerful than speaking, and so she remained a living legend walking the palace corridors. Her freshly washed hair braided not just in gold thread, but in memory. Her very existence challenged the norms. She had proven that Pathian might wasn't confined to masculine hands. It could ride into battle with tangled hair and return with cities at its feet. And all she had to do now was wait, because sometimes the greatest move is no move at all. As the years passed, Rodan's name slowly faded from the formal records. Pathian scribes, more eager to elevate kings and dynasties than unruly warrior princesses, began to downplay her campaign. The silence she once used as a weapon now became the excuse for eraser. No grand Muslim was raised in her name, no epic poem commissioned by the state bore her face on golden scrolls, but that's the thing about true legend. It doesn't need permission to survive in the outposts where her army had marched in the villages. She spared her name remained a whispered spell mothers told. Stories of her to their daughters not as a fairy tale, but as a warning to any man who underestimated a woman with a mission soldiers. Recited her tactics as if they were sacred text in Rebels, well, even decades later. They still spoke of her as if she might ride again from the dust, with hair flying like war banners. There is something profoundly unsettling about someone who breaks every rule of their time and still wins. Radagon wasn't content to be decoration in a court. She didn't play the flute paint birds or practice the refined art of being quietly ignored. She burned through her time like a comet and then vanished. Just as quickly, historians have debated what became of her. Some believe she retired from public life, choosing peace over politics. Others think she remained an advisor in the shadows, shaping Pathian strategy from behind the veil of anonymity. A few romantics claim she wrote out one final time to settle a border dispute and disappeared into legend. Never confirmed, never denied, but what's certain is this: her legacy endured where it mattered most in the people she may not have worn the crown, but she ruled in ways no diadem ever could she redefine. What loyalty meant she showed that a vow, even one as strange as refusing to comb your hair, could be as binding as a royal decree and far more inspiring. And though history books may offer her only a footnote, the dust of Pathia still remembers her, because you don't need a marble statue to be eternal. You just need to keep your vow and win centuries after her. Death Radagon's story remains a paradox, well known in whispers, yet elusive in inked no cowering statue bears. Her likeness no royal tomb sings, her praises in carved stone, but in the collective memory of those who admire rebellion, endurance, and principled ferocity, she is immortal, not in the way kings are remembered, but in the way forces of nature are. She didn't need to conquer foreign lands or sign monumental treaties. What she conquered was expectation in a world where women were told to wait behind curtains, while men spilled blood in their name. Ronan tore the curtain down and marched out. Barefoot, helmet in hand, she didn't ask for command, she took it, and the empire didn't collapse, it followed. More importantly, she taught her people a lesson that no decree could enforce, that loyalty doesn't come from fear, it comes from seeing your leader suffer beside you from watching them, choose discipline over comfort from watching them, keep a vow longer than anyone thought possible. She wasn't perfect, no legend is but her story endures precisely because it wasn't polished or clean, it was tangled, muddy, honest like her hair on that final day of victory. And that filth was dignity, and that vow was a vision of leadership stronger than any title. When her soldiers looked at her, they didn't see a princess, they saw someone who believed in the fight more than her own vanity, and that, as the part history couldn't quite erase even. Now, long after Paphia has crumbled and its cities turned to sand, her name returns in moments of resistance. Artists revive her, writers search for her footprints. A vow not to wash until victory. It sounds absurd to some, but to those who had to claw their way through injustice, it makes perfect sense. Radagon was never about glamour, she was about grit, and in the end, it was the dust that crowned her, not gold dust, the same substance emperors try to escape in death. Yet the very thing she wore like a badge of honor, she was forgotten by kings, ignored by chroniclers, but remembered by the dust. And that's where legends truly live, not in stone but in soil, before empires clashed and blood soaked the sand, before kings trembled at her name. Tomius was simply a daughter of the wind, born to the raw open steppe. Land she came from was not gilded in marble or echoing with philosophy. It was brutal, free, and endlessly vast. This was the world of the Massage. Fierce nomadic horse archers who rode like spirits of the plains, their lives shaped by survival, honor, and war we know little of. Tomius's childhood, but we can imagine the rhythm of it. She would have learned to ride before she could run to shoot, before she could speak in full sentences. Among the Massage girls were not caged in tents or veiled by silence. They trained beside the boys, rode with the warriors, and grew up with iron in their blood to lead. One had to bleed, and to even as a young woman bled for her people, her tribe worshipped the sun and sky lived off their herds and buried their dead with weapons ready for battle in the afterlife. They had no cities, no golden temples, but they had pride. And when enemies approached, they met them not with prayers, but with arrows. Tamias likely came to power after the death of her husband, who may have ruled the tribe before her, but what's certain is that when the moment came, she didn't inherit leadership. She seized it in a time when most women were considered property. Tamias commanded an army. She negotiated with kings. She dared to speak as an equal, and if they didn't listen, she made them. She was more than a queen, she was. Shahat the Steppes checkmate a war Arkif, in bronze and leather, who would soon face the greatest empire on earth. But power, especially for a woman, never comes without consequence, as Tamias began to solidify her rule. Whispers grew louder across the mountains to the south. A king was watching. His name was Cyrus the Great, and he wanted more. The stage was set, the steppe wind howled, and Tomius, daughter of warriors, would soon ride into legend. Well, Tomius reigned over the open steppes far to the south. A different kind of power was rising, structured. Imperial, relentless Cyrus, the great founder of the Achaemenid Empire, had already conquered Lydia in the west and Babylon in the south. His banners flew over deserts, mountains, and cities where languages changed every few days' ride. But Cyrus wasn't done. He was a builder of empires, and every builder eventually eyes the horizon too. Cyrus the Massage were a threat wrapped in opportunity. They weren't rich in gold or cities, but they controlled the northeastern frontier, and that meant access to key lands, resources, and trade routes. More importantly, the Mazashi had something no empire could afford to ignore: pride, and pride in Cyrus's eyes could be bent or broken. But Cyrus also knew that brute force wasn't always the best first move. He had a reputation for cleverness, diplomacy, and strategic trickery, so he tried a different approach, one that kings before him had used to dissolve threats without a single drop of blood. He proposed marriage according to ancient sources. Notably, Herodotus Cyrus sent envoys to Tamiris, offering an alliance through matrimony on paper. It was a real match, the great king of Persia and the warrior queen of the Massag. But Tamias wasn't naive. She saw the proposal for what it was, not an offer of love or partnership, but a calculated attempt to absorb her people without a fight. She declined, and that rejection didn't sit well in the halls of Papilolis. With the diplomatic games over, Cyrus shifted to his favorite language war. He ordered his army to cross the Araxes River, the natural barrier that separated Persia from the land of the Masti. He was going to take what Tomius refused to give, but Tomius was already preparing. She knew the terrain. She knew how her people fought on horseback, fast and furious. And most of all, she knew Cyrus wasn't just coming for land. He was coming to crush a woman who dared to say no the world. This most powerful king had declared war, but he had no idea what kind of fury he had just awakened on the steppe. Cyrus, the great master strategist and seasoned conqueror, believed he could outwit us. He had faced kings, crushed cities, and subdued nations. To him, the Massage were little more than wild nomads with fast horses and no cities to defend. He didn't realize he was stepping into the path of someone just as cunning and far more furious. Tamias had warned him after rejecting his marriage offer. She sent a clear message: cross the Araxes River and you will regret it. That Cyrus crossed anyway, building a bridge of boats to carry his army into Masai land. Instead of striking immediately, Tomius pulled her forces back, luring Cyrus deeper into unfamiliar terrain. The Persians found an abandoned camp, well stocked with food, and more importantly, wine, a luxury. The nomadic Massaget rarely indulged in it, was a baited trap, and Cyrus took it, perhaps thinking the enemy had panicked and fled. Inside the camp, he left a portion of his army under the command of General Harpagus, a trusted officer, as the Massage returned under the cover of night. They fell upon the drunk and unsuspecting Persians with deadly precision. The battle was brutal, and swift among the dead was Sparapises, Tomius's son, and a massage commander. Accounts differ on what happened next. Some say Sparapises was taken alive and, realizing his capture, begged for death and took his own life. Others claim he was killed in the fighting, but all agree when news reached Tedious, something inside her shattered and then turned to steel. Her grief was volcanic, but her rage that became legendary. She sent another message to Cyrus. This one wasn't a warning, it was a vow. You may be a glutton for blood, she said, but I swear I will give you your fill. She promised to make the ground run red with Persian blood, and her vengeance would not be quiet. Cyrus had taken her son, he had violated her land. Now he would meet not the queen of the massage, but the mother of a slain warrior, and the last face he would ever see. The next battle would not be a skirmish, it would be an execution. The sun rose over the plains like a blade, sharp and blinding. Tamius stood at the head of her army, no longer just a queen, but a storm given form. Her warriors, hardened by the nomadic life, painted their faces with ash and rage. This wasn't about politics anymore, this was about blood. Cyrus, for all his might, had underestimated the massage. He assumed they would fight like the tribes he had conquered before, chaotic, uncoordinated, easy to crush, but Tomius had spent her life among warriors. She understood how to strike, not blindly, but with precision. She rallied her forces for a full-scale assault on the Persian invaders, and this time she wasn't holding back. The location of the final battle is lost to history, swallowed by the vastness of the steppe. But what's clear is that Tomius launched a ferocious counterattack. Her cavalry swept across the plains like a tide of knives. They fired arrows from horseback, closed in with axes, and fought like people with nothing left to lose. The Persians, battle-hardened, disciplined, and experienced, weren't expecting this, or inscribe edicts on golden tablets. Her people, the Maya, were nomads, living not by walls, but by the rhythms of the land, the sky, and the horse. This meant that Tomius' legacy was never institutionalized. There were no marble busts or royal coins bearing her likeness, no archives to immortalize her decrees. Instead, her story passed on as stories do on the steppe, through firelight song and the whispered A of warriors. The Massage were one of many powerful tribes of the Central Asian steppes. Their cousins included the Siams, the Saka, and the Dahai, all expert horse archers who roamed the lands between the Caspian Sea and the borders of ancient China. These tribes were feared by empires for their mobility, unpredictability, and ferocity in battle. Tomius, as a female leader among them, was rare, but not entirely unique. Steppe culture, unlike many sedentary civilizations, allowed women far greater freedoms. Women rode, hunted, fought, and even led among the Scythians graves of female warriors buried with weapons, armor, and horse gear have been found by archaeologists, confirming that the stories of fierce steppe queens were more than just legend. Tamius stood at the pinnacle of that tradition. Her power didn't come from inheritance or religion. It came from respect, grit, and sheer capability. She was a unifying force among scattered clans, a political leader, and a military commander in a landscape where survival meant riding faster, shooting better, and fearing nothing. But because the Massage tea left no monuments, Tomius became a kind of phantom. Queen, her name echoing only in the writings of outsiders and in the oral traditions of the steppe. To the Persian scribes, she was a warning, to the Greeks a marvel, and to her people likely a memory carried in bloodlines and battle songs. A ghost who rode with them across the plains. Empires may rise and fall in stone, but the stories of the steppe live on in the wind. And Tamius, fierce, grieving, and unbroken, became its voice centuries past, and the empires that once surrounded the Massaget rose and crumbled. Cyrus's successors built Persepolis, fought Alexander the Great, and faded into the dusty footnotes of time, but to her legend endured not in the palaces of kings, but in the hearts of those who refused to bow. Across Central Asia, she became more than a queen. She became a symbol of female strength, of resistance, of the untamed spirit of the steppe. In many ways, Tomius embodied a kind of defiance that transcended geography. She was not Ramong, not Greek, not Persian, and so her story belonged to no empire that made her dangerous and inspiring. In the medieval Islamic world, chroniclers occasionally mentioned her name reshaped by language, but never quite forgotten. In some versions, she was praised for her justice and vengeance. In others, she was seen as a savage, queen, a reminder that power in the hands of a woman could be both glorious and terrifying. By the time the Renaissance rolled around, European artists rediscovered her tale through the writings of Herodotus. Painters depicted her in elaborate armor, standing triumphantly over Cyrus's lifeless body. In one dramatic painting, she holds his severed head aloft like a trophy, blood-soaked and victorious. It was theatrical, yes, but also political. These artists were fascinated by the idea of a woman who didn't just survive in a man's world. She won in the 19th and 20th centuries. Tomius became a nationalist icon in regions like Kazakhstan. Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan poets and educators reclaimed her as a historical heroine, proof that the roots of Central Asian identity were fierce, proud, and deeply feminine. Her name appeared in textbooks, statues, and even military ceremonies. A woman who had once ruled on horseback, with a bow in hand, was now riding once more through memory and myth, through rebellion and pride, in a world that still wrestles with the idea of powerful women. Tomius remains a challenge. She wasn't perfect, saintly, or tame. She was decisive, brutal, when necessary, compassionate, only to those who deserved it. She was resistance in human form, and the blood of empire on her hands was a crown she wore without apology. History tends to favor the builders of monuments, the writers of laws, the kings who carved their names into stone. Tomius did none of these. She left no empire behind, no palace to excavate, no royal seal to decipher, and yet her name still lives, not because she ruled forever, but because she refused to be erased. She stands as a contradiction to how history often remembers women, not as helpmates or footnotes, but as forces of destiny. Tomius didn't beg for recognition. She took it with blood and fire. She didn't ride behind a king. She rode against one, and when her story is retold in classrooms from Central Asia to Europe, not simply because she killed Cyrus the Great, but because she dared to defy him. She wasn't defending an empire, she was defending freedom, a freedom that rode on the backs of horses, that hunted with hawks, that slept under the stars, a freedom that could not be neatly drawn on a map today. Her statues rise from Kazakhstan's capital cities, and her face adorns coins and textbooks to modern Central Asians. She is a mother of nations, a link to a pre-Islamic, pre-Soviet, proudly nomadic past. A reminder that their identity wasn't born in submission, but in the cry of battle and the gallop of horses, in a world still divided by power, by gender. By memory, Tomius is a beacon, not just because she killed a great king, but because she taught us something even greater, that dignity is not given, it is seized. That sometimes leadership looks like a mother grieving her son and refusing to let the killer walk away. We often wonder why some names survive while others vanish. Tomius survived because she was unforgettable, because in a time when women were expected to disappear into the tents of men, she rose blade in hand, fury in heart, and carved her story into the flesh of history. Empires fall, statues crumble, but legends ride, and somewhere in the whispering winds of the steppe, a queen still gallops. Unbroken, undefeated, and utterly unforgettable. In ancient Egypt, beekeeping wasn't a hobby, it was a state. Sponsored science with divine approval long before modern apiaries. Egyptians had already developed an organized mobile system for managing bees and extracting honey. By 2400 BC, beekeeping was depicted in detail on the walls of tombs in the sun-drenched necropolises of Saqqara. It wasn't just about harvesting honey, it was a sacred practice embedded in agriculture, medicine, religion, and even the afterlife. The Egyptians used horizontal clay tube hives, typically stacked in rows and laid on their sides. These were nothing like modern wooden boxes. They looked more like terracotta drain pipes, and they were carefully designed to be relocated seasonally as the Nile's floodwaters receded and flowers bloomed. Along its banks, hives were moved up and down the river to follow the nectar flow. This transhumance method was incredibly advanced for its time, almost like ancient GPS for beekeepers used clay or stone pipes to blow smoke into the hives, calming the bees before honey extraction without protective suits. These keepers had to rely on careful timing, experience, and a fair bit of courage. Honeycombs were removed gently, and the honey was collected not just for food, but for medicine, mummification, and sacred rites. Honey was considered a gift from the gods, a divine substance associated with Ra, the sun god. According to Egyptian myth, bees were born from the tears of Re as they fell to earth. This wasn't poetic fluff, it shaped how the Egyptians treated bees as messengers between the mortal world, and the divine honey was used in temple offerings, horary rituals, and even as a currency in trade. It also had a prominent role in medicine. Ancient papyri list honey as a key ingredient in over 500 remedies mixed with herbs, wine, or milk to treat wounds, infections, and gastrointestinal issues. Its antibacterial properties were known even if the science wasn't. Beeswax too was harvested and used in cosmetics, embalming, and even in writing tablets. It had value beyond the hive, becoming part of daily life for scribes, priests, and healers alike. In Egypt, the hive wasn't just a source of sweetness, it was a symbol of balance, healing, and celestial order, carefully cultivated under the watchful eyes of both humans and gods. While Egypt gave beekeeping structure and sanctity, ancient Mesopotamia gave it something equally vital: laws. The cradle of civilization didn't just master irrigation, writing, and city building, they also knew the value of honey and the importance of protecting its production, though Mesopotamian beekeeping wasn't as visually celebrated as in Egyptian tombs. Its traces are found in ununiform tablets and legal codes, suggesting a quietly sophisticated practice. References to bees and honey appear as early as the Sumerian period. In Akkadian and Babylonian texts, there are mentions of nins, meaning bee gardens or apiaries. These spaces were often attached to temple grounds or royal estates, suggesting honey production was an elite-controlled resource. Honey and beeswax were used in religious offerings, medicine, food, and trade, and losing a hive could be a serious economic blow. The most telling piece of evidence comes from the Code of Hammurabi, dating to around 1754 BCE. While most of the code is famously devoted to issues like theft, injury, and agriculture, a few lines directly address bee disputes. If someone allowed their bees to swarm into another man's field and the bees caused damage, they were liable. If honey was stolen, restitution had to be made, sometimes in the form of silver or replacement jars. In a world where almost everything was counted in grain, the fact that honey warranted its own legal protection speaks volumes. Mesopotamians also understood bees as more than just insects. Some texts describe them as divine messengers, even linking them to Ninit, the god of agriculture and war. Beeswax, in particular, was valued for sealing documents and creating ritual figurines. It was both practical and mystical part of both bureaucracy and magic. Though the exact design of Mesopotamian hives isn't fully preserved, scholars believe they may have used mud brick or woven basket hives. Similar to early Levantan styles, these would have been kept in shaded gardens or rooftops protected from the harsh summer heat. Mesopotamian beekeeping was less about worship and more about structure, regulating resources, ensuring fairness, and maintaining the economic balance of the society. Where even a bee sting might end in litigation, here, the hive was not just a biological wonder, it was a microcosm of order, law, and the civilizing impulse itself in the rugged highlands of Anatolia long before the Greeks took center stage. The Hittites were quietly mastering the art of beekeeping, and they were untreating it like a backyard hobby. To the Hittites' bees were sacred agents of purity messengers between realms and essential to both agriculture and the spiritual health of the kingdom, unlike Egypt and Mesopotamia, where beekeeping was a bell of science and economics. The Hittites took a more ritualistic approach in religious texts from the 14th and 13th centuries. BCE bees are mentioned not just as producers of honey, but as active participants in purification rites. One famous Hittite ritual text describes a ceremony in which a bee is summoned to go and remove the evil, the impurity, and the wrath of the gods. The bee is then released, not killed, a rare show of mercy in ancient rites, suggesting a deep reverence for the insect. Hittites valued honey for its taste and its sacred utility. It was used in libation, sacrificial offerings, and anointing. Rituals often combined with wine milk or grain honey. Wasn't just consumed, it was poured, burned, and blessed. It served as a medium between human intention and divine reception in terms of practice. Evidence suggests the Hittites used clay or woven hives, likely stored in protected enclosures near temples or royal estates, though the archaeological record is sparse. Parallels with neighboring Levantine and Syrian traditions hint at portable tube-like hives, possibly made from straw and mud, stacked and managed, much like those in Egypt. Beekeepers in the Hittite world likely operated under temple control. Their work deeply embedded in seasonal festivals and state rituals. Honey was not a mere commodity. It was a tool of diplomacy, healing, and spiritual cleansing. The bee, small and unassuming, held symbolic weight that far exceeded its size. The Hittites also contributed a vital piece to the global understanding of bees. They recognized bee migration. Some surviving texts describe the seasonal behaviors of swarms, linking blooming patterns with honey flow, an insight that shows how closely they observed their environment in Anatolia. The hum of the hive wasn't background noise, it was a sacred frequency vibrating through the bones of gods and kings alike. The ancient Greeks didn't just study bees, they admired them, feared them, and modeled society on their mysterious order. To the Greeks, the hive was more than a place of honey, it was a living metaphor, a model for the ideal city-state, a symbol of divine order and a source of endless scientific curiosity. Greek beekeepers advanced the science of apiculture with a blend of practical knowledge and philosophical flair. Unlike earlier civilizations that used stationary clay hives, the Greeks developed movable terracotta hives with removable lids and sections. These allowed easier access to the honeycomb without destroying the colony, an early step towards sustainable harvesting. They also mastered the art of smoke control, using ceramic bellows and clay smokers. They would puff smoke into the hive entrance, sedating the bees before honey extraction. This innovation not only reduced stings, but also preserved the hive's structure, allowing for multiple harvests per season. One of the most influential minds in Greek history, Aristotle, studied bees in extraordinary detail. In his Historia Nalium, he described hive behavior, noting that bees appeared to have distinct roles. Some gathered nectar, others defended the hive, and one, whom he called the king bee, seemed to lead. Although he got the gender wrong, Aristotle's observations laid the groundwork for centuries of bee research. Honey held a revered place in Greek culture. It sweetened wine, preserved fruits, and flavored cakes. It was also used as a base for medicinal salves, especially in wound care, and was seen as a divine gift. The Greeks believed that ambrosia, the food of the gods, was a mixture of honey and wine. The bee itself had mythological significance. It was associated with Artemis, goddess of wild things, and Dieta, goddess of the harvest. Priestesses of Artemis were even called Melissa, the Greek word for bees. The idea of the bee as a sacred feminine force carried deep symbolic power for the Greeks. The hive was both scientific marvel and spiritual emblem, a reminder that even the smallest creatures move with purpose, discipline, and grace. In studying bees, they believed they were studying the very laws of nature and perhaps of the gods themselves. If the Greeks studied bees with wonder, the Romans managed them with Ambition beekeeping in the Roman Empire wasn't just a cottage industry. It was scaled to match the needs of a civilization that stretched across continents, from the vineyards of Gaul to the hills of Hispania. Rome turned the humble hive into an empire-wide enterprise. The Romans inherited much of their agricultural knowledge from the Greeks and Etruscans, but they expanded it into a formalized agricultural science. Writers like Varro and Columella recorded detailed instructions for building hives, harvesting honey, and relocating colonies. Their treatises describe beekeeping with a startling modernity, including observations on swarm behavior, seasonal cycles, and pest control. Roman hives came in many forms: hollow logs, cork bark containers, clay tubes, and even woven baskets. Sealed with dung or mud. Flexibility was key in colder climates. More insulation was needed in warmer provinces. Ventilation was critical. These innovations allowed Rome's beekeepers to adapt the craft across vastly different regions of the empire. To calm bees, Romans employed clay pots filled with smoldering herbs like thyme or oregano. The smoke soothed the hive and perhaps added a subtle flavor to the honey. Harvesting was done with iron knives, and wax was separated by melting and straining, later used in candles, writing tablets, cosmetics, and even waterproofing ships. Honey wasn't just food, it was everywhere. It was added to wine to make mulling, used in baking, in sources for meat and fish, and even as an early energy source for athletes and soldiers. Roman physicians, following Hippocratic traditions, prescribed honey for sore throats, wounds, fevers, and digestive problems. Its antibacterial properties were well known and well used, but perhaps the most Roman thing about their beekeeping was organization. Large villas often had dedicated honey farms, run by enslaved labor under the supervision of estate managers. Production was recorded in ledgers and surplus. Honey was sold in markets or exported to distant provinces. Bees were viewed not just as insects, but as productive citizens of the Roman economy. To the Romans, a well-run hive mirrored a well-run household, ordered, obedient, and endlessly fruitful. While ancient civilizations cultivated bees for honey and wax, many also saw the hive as a doorway to the divine across Egypt, Greece, Mesopotamia, and beyond. Bees weren't just insects, they were spiritual beings buzzing between worlds, delivering messages from gods and offering sacred gifts. Like honey that bridged the natural and supernatural realms. In Egypt, bees were directly tied to divine creation, as mentioned. Earlier mythology claimed that Ra, the sun god, shed tears that turned into bees upon touching the earth. Honey was used in temple offerings to please deities and accompany the dead. Into the afterlife, the bee also became a royal symbol. Pharaohs of Lower Egypt bore the title He of the Sedge, and the bee connecting their authority to the cosmic harmony of the hive. In Greece, the bee held powerful feminine symbolism. The priestesses of Deida and Artemis, goddesses of fertility and wilderness, were called Melis, or bees. These women were considered channels between the divine and mortal realms. The Oracle of Delhi, one of the most important religious centers in the ancient world, was believed by some to have originally been presided over by bee priestesses. Even the famed Pythia, the Delphic prophetess, was sometimes called the Delphic bee. The hive itself was often seen as a microcosm of perfect order. Disciplined, selfless, and productive philosophers and mystics compared bee society to ideal human society: cooperative, industrious, and reverent. The Stoics admired bees for their instinctive sense of duty early. Christians would later adopt the bee as a symbol of chastity and resurrection, noting how bees create but do not lust. In the magical traditions of Mesopotamia, bees were invoked in ritual purification. In some Hittite ceremonies, a live bee was released after absorbing the impurities of the community, literally carrying sin away on its tiny wings. Honey and wax were burned in sacred fires used in crafting, protective amulets, and embedded in magical texts for blessings and healing. The bee was more than a metaphor. It was a bridge, a creature that lived in nature's hidden spaces, made golden food without killing, and stung only in defense. To ancient People's bees weren't just miraculous, they were mystical to the ancient world. Honey wasn't just delicious, it was divine medicine. Long before bacteria were discovered, people instinctively knew that honey could clean wounds, soothe coughs, and preserve the body. It wasn't magic, though, it often felt like it. It was chemistry centuries ahead of its formal explanation in Egypt. Honey was a cornerstone of ancient medicine, medical papyri like the Ebersis Papyrus circa 1550 BC. Less honey and over 500 prescriptions. It was mixed with milk, figs, garlic, and herbs to treat everything from eye infections to digestive problems when paired with animal fat or resin. It was applied as a salve to burns and cuts. Doctors knew that wounds treated with honey healed faster and resisted infection, likely due to honey's natural acidity and hydrogen peroxide content. The Greeks followed suit. Hippocrates, the father of modern medicine, prescribed honey for respiratory problems, ulcers, and fatigue. He used honey mixed with vinegar to create oxymol, a tonic used to clear phlegm and reduce fevers. Greek athletes drank honeyed water to boost stamina during Olympic training, believing it restored strength quicker than wine or water alone. In India, the Ayurvedic system held honey Mardu in high regard. It was classified by taste, source, and medicinal potency. Vedic texts warned against overheating honey, but endorsed it as a treatment for indigestion, colds, wounds, and even poison. It was also used in religious rituals offered to gods and consumed during sacred fasts for both spiritual and bodily cleansing. The Romans, too, believed in the medicinal power of honey. Pliny the Elder recorded dozens of remedies involving honey in his natural history. It was a base for ointments, gargles, and laxatives, and even used to treat the wounded after battle. Honey mixed with poppy juice was given as a sedative. Roman surgeons kept it on hand to dress wounds and reduce inflammation. Beeswax had its place in medicine, too, as a base for plasters, balms, and even dental fillings. Its malleability and resistance to decay made it ideal for sealing and preserving. In short, honey in the ancient world wasn't just sweet, it was life-saving. It healed the sick, preserved the dead, and symbolized purity. It was the pharmacy of the gods. Delivered by the wings of bees, ancient beekeepers were more than farmers. They were innovators, engineers, and keen observers of nature across civilizations. They developed specialized tools and methods that allowed them to manage bee colonies, effectively harvest honey sustainably, and even protect themselves from the bees. Defensive stings. One of the most important innovations was the design of the hive itself. The Egyptians popularized the use of horizontal cylindrical clay hives, essentially large terracotta tubes stacked in rows. These hives were durable, portable, and mimicked natural cavities where bees thrived. Similar, the Greeks and Romans used terracotta and woven basket hives, some with removable lids to allow access to honeycombs without destroying the colony. The ability to inspect and harvest without killing the bees was revolutionary, paving the way for modern sustainable agriculture. To safely extract honey, ancient beekeepers employed smoke to calm the bees. The Greeks invented clay smokers and bellows designed to direct smoke into the hive's entrance. The smoke masked alarm pheromones released by guard bees, reducing their aggression. Romans refined this by burning fragrant herbs such as thyme or oregano, which soothed the bees and possibly imparted subtle flavors to the honey harvesting tools. Varied wooden or bronze knives were used to slice combs carefully. Sometimes honeycombs were pressed to extract liquid honey, and wax was melted and filtered for later use. Beekeepers often wore minimal protection, relying on experience and careful technique to avoid stings. Suits and gloves were millennia away. Ancient texts reveal that beekeepers also observed bee behavior meticulously. They understood swarm cycles, seasonal patterns, and the importance of moving hives to optimize nectar collection. Some cultures practice transhumans, relocating hives to follow flowering plants' blooms, similar to modern migratory beekeeping. Additionally, honey storage was a crucial aspect of ancient beekeeping. Egyptians used sealed ceramic jars to store honey, protecting it from moisture and spillage. honey's remarkable shelf life was well known, sometimes lasting centuries sealed within tombs. Even the relationship between humans and bees was carefully managed. Rituals were performed to appease bee spirits or gods, ensuring cooperation and avoiding misfortune. This spiritual care was as vital as the physical tools in maintaining a productive hive in all ancient. Beekeeping was a blend of craftsmanship, natural science, and reverence. The tools and techniques they developed set foundations that still influence modern apiculture. The ancient practice of beekeeping laid the groundwork for a relationship between humans and bees that continues to this day, far from a simple agricultural activity. Early beekeeping was an art and science that influenced medicine, religion, economy, and ecology across civilizations, shaping the way we understand nature and sustainability. From the Nile Valley to the hills of Anatolia, from the temples of Greece to the farms of Rome, ancient beekeepers honed methods to protect and sustain their colonies. Their innovations in hive design, smoke use, and seasonal management allowed for a sustainable honey harvest, a practice crucial for both survival and trade. The respect they showed for the bees' life cycles helped foster a model of harmony between humans and nature. Their understanding of honey as a medicine informed the early pharmacopoeias of Egypt, India, and Rome, influencing healing practices that persist in traditional medicine worldwide. Honey's antibacterial and preservative properties became the foundation for wound care and remedies, while beeswax shaped early technologies. In cosmetics, art, and construction, the symbolic and spiritual meanings attributed to bees and honey in ancient cultures also endure. Religious rituals honoring bees and honey continue in various traditions, reflecting humanity's ongoing fascination with the hive as a metaphor for order, cooperation, and divine blessing. The idea of bees as messengers between worlds or symbols of resurrection permeates art, literature, and folklore across centuries. Moreover, the ancient practice of migratory beekeeping, moving hives to follow floral blooms, is echoed in modern commercial agriculture, essential for crop pollination and global food production. The innovations of ancient beekeepers help set the stage for today's awareness of bees as vital pollinators and the environmental challenges they face. Despite technological advances, the core relationship remains unchanged. Humans depend on bees for food, medicine, and ecosystem health, and bees in turn have shaped human culture, economy, and spirituality. Since the dawn of civilization, the legacy of ancient beekeeping is a testament to human ingenuity, respect for nature, and the enduring power of collaboration both within the hive and between species. It reminds us that even the smallest creatures can inspire science, faith, and survival. Hey guys, tonight we journey back thousands of years to the banks of the Nile, to a civilization known for pyramids, pharaohs and gods that watched your every move. But behind the gold masks and grand temples lies a much harsher reality today. We're asking what would happen if you lived just one day in ancient Egypt. Because let me tell you, the sun isn't the only thing that will roast you alive. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you retuning in from and what time it is for you. Let's journey together. Welcome to It is always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Before now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum and let us ease into tonight. Ancient Egypt, land of pyramids, gods, and relentless ultraviolet violence. You even open your eyes. The sun is already blasting through your reed hut, like it is auditioning for the role of unforgiving sky god. There are no curtains, no shades, and certainly no air conditioning, just the raw, unforgiving heat of the desert, baking everything, including you, by breakfast. You're lying on a straw mat with a linen sheet that's more suggestion than protection. The Nile breeze you were promised in all those travel documentaries? Yeah, it's gone. Probably died sometime around 2800 BC. By the time you stumble outside, the temperature is already flirting with 90°F or around 32°C, and it's not even mid-morning. The sun doesn't just shine in ancient Egypt, it attacks your linen tunic useless. You might get a little relief hiding, like wearing tissue paper in a sauna, and don't even think about sunscreen. There is no aloe vera, no SPF 50, not even a floppy, and you better not complain, Ray the sun god, you on the other. By midday, the stones under your feet are hot enough to cook. Hat with a logo from a beach resort, ancient Egyptians did have protective oils, but unless you were wealthy or work in a temple, you're not getting any of it. Your best option, smear yourself with mud. And this is, or crocodile dung, which apparently might keep you from turning into a human. Torch emphasis on light lentil shade as the luxury trees are rare. Behind a mud brick wall, but even that wall is sweating by now. And the good news is the Nile is just a short walk away. The banks are buzzing with flies, frogs, and things that... The bad news, you can already smell it, hand look. Like someone threw you into a clay oven and forgot to set a timer. Instead, you lather yourself in that is watching. And in ancient Egypt, the sun wasn't just weather, it was divine. Authority. The hotter the day, the more powerful Ra was feeling. So basically, if you're melting, it's a spiritual compliment. In short, surviving one day in ancient Egypt requires hydration, humility, and an ironclad tolerance for feeling like a roast chicken just the morning. You're finally out of bed, or rather off your scratchy straw mat. Before you see it, yes, the mighty Nile, the life giver of ancient Egypt, revered. If you're a city dweller in Memphis or Thebes, you might be lucky as sacred the reason civilization here even exists. But let's be honest, it as a daily ritual, spiritual, necessary, it feeds you, cleans you, and in reality, it as part miracle, part biohazard. You've sandpapered yourself semi-clean, and your smells like a fish market, had a bad breakup with a swamp. Probably shouldn't have legs, but do. Still, this is where you bathe soap. And do and expect hasn't been invented yet, and even if it had, you couldn't afford it. The centerpiece of your meal, bread lots, the most important and least freshest cleansing technology of the day. Sand, that's right, exfoliation that you sit on. Egyptian way, just rub yourself down with coarse grains and call it skincare. It's like nature's sandpaper, but less effective. Washing clothes also done in the Nile, and by washing, we mean pounding them against rocks while praying that a crocodile doesn't mistake your laundry for a tasty midday snack. Oh, and do and be surprised if. Make things more fun, let's not forget the occasional sewage runoff from upstream. Remember, people, livestock, and the occasional funeral boat all share this river, and yet somehow this is a daily dose of considered clean. You scrub, rinse, and emerge feeling slightly less sticky and only moderately more worried about leeches. Enough to use a public basin or cistern, but for everyone else, it's Nile or nothing. Privacy. This is a public bathing space shared by families, neighbors, livestock, and the odd ibis pecking around your ankles like it pays rent. Water jars are filled and balanced on heads, carried back to your mud brick house before the midday heat turns the clay into toast and slightly traumatic. So yes, the Nile as sacred quenches your thirst, but let us not pretend it's a sparkling oasis. And all you've got, by now you've bathed in the crocodile-fisted Nile body, feels like a baked fig. Time for breakfast, glamorous meal of your ancient Egyptian day. Let's set expectations. There are no eggs, Benedict, no fruit bowls, and absolutely no iced lattes. Breakfast in ancient Egypt is less of a culinary event and more of a tactical refueling operation. A low stool if you have one, or just squat in the corner like everyone else of it, dense, coarse, and often as chewy as a leather sandal. It's made from emma wheat or barley and baked in clay ovens that may or may not be shared by the local rats. There's sand in your slice. Not as a topping, just an uninvited ingredient from the grinding stones. Minerals, you could say, then comes the beer. But don't get excited. This isn't. Crisp, bubbly craft ale. This is thick, cloudy, lukewarm liquid bread, more porridge than pint. It's packed with calories and vaguely fermented. A medieval smoothie with a faint taste of sour cereal and survival. Even children drink it. Not to be edgy, but because it's safer than water. At least the brewing process boils out the parasites, unlike the Nile, which we just... To go with your carbon foam combo protein, only if someone caught a fish disgust is basically a petri dish. If you're lucky, and we mean very lucky, you might get an onion or a few dried dates and didn't immediately eat it raw. And as you chew your rock-like loaf and sip your grain sludge, flies buzz around you like it's a buffet because it is for them. You swat at them with one hand, hold your cup with the other, and try not to think too hard about the fact that this is likely the best meal you will have today. Breakfast in ancient Egypt isn't about flavor, it's about function. It fuels your body just enough to survive until the next time someone hands you another sand-infused brick of bread. Bon appetit. You've had your gritty bread, your chunky beer, and just enough rest to call yourself functional. Now it's time to work, and trust me, ancient Egyptian labor makes modern burnout look like a spa day. Unless you're a scribe priest or royalty, which, let's be honest, you're not. Your job is pure muscle and dust, no air-conditioned cubicle, no coffee breaks, no ergonomic chairs, just sweat, sand, and a constant risk of collapsing before noon. If you're a farmer, you'll be ankle-deep in Nile, mud by sunrise yanking weeds, or planting barley under the eye of an overseer whose hobby seems to be yelling. You use wooden plows, crude sickles, and your bare hands. If your back hurts, congratulations. That means it's working. If you're a laborer, things get even more biblical. Imagine hauling multi-ton stones for... And if you mess up a temple construction under a blazing sun while barefoot up ramps made of gravel and prayer, there's no ocean here. You trip. That's a broken ankle and a shrug from the foreman. Working on tombs, that's another level of grind. You're hammering limestone, chiseling out burial chambers for people who will get to rest longer than you ever will. Your break is when the baby naps for 7 minutes. Pharaoh's tomb, let's just say job security, might involve a sealed chamber and a curse. And if you're a woman, you're not off the hook. Domestic work is also, and falling behind means physical labor. Grinding grain, hauling water, weaving linen, caring for kids. And there's no clocking out. The sun is your supervisor when it's still helping in the fields. While you prepare dinner, you eat on the go. You wipe sweat with your tunic, keep moving because slowing down means falling behind. Someone else gets your grain quota, and you get the blame. Finally sinks behind the horizon. You crawl home half alive, dust-caked, and he is the human embodiment dreaming of softer sandals and a less aggressive sun god work in ancient Egypt. As potentially treason. Why? Because your boss isn't just a ruler. In other words, if the river floods, well, this year, think isn't just hard. It's endless. It's a full body commitment to survival day after day. Until your body gives out or your overseer decides you're not worth speaking ill of him could land. You a date with a whip, a set of shackles. Beating, and that's not even the worst of it. After sweating your soul out in the fields or quarry, you might be tempted to grumble. Maybe something small a little. You see his face everywhere on statues. If this job stinks, or why am I doing this again, stop right there. Because in ancient Egypt, complaining is unjust frowned upon. That is law and do and expect. He is a literal god, the pharaoh is, and some guy who got elected or born into a lucky family of Horus, son of Ra, chosen by the heavens to rule over Egypt and keep Mayhat divine cosmic order intact. The pharaoh. If it doesn't, well, maybe you didn't pray hard enough. Questioning his authority isn't just rude. It's blasphemy or an early trip to the underworld with none of your favorite burial goods. You. Temple walls, coins, even bread molds. His name is chanted in rituals. His image is painted larger than everyone else, as in every mural. That's not artistic exaggeration to ever see him. If you're a commoner, the closest you'll get is watching a golden bark float by during a religious festival blink, and he's gone. Back to a palace you'll never enter, surrounded by officials, guards, scribes, and enough gold to finance a small civilization, which, fun fact, he basically does. You're lucky enough to work on a royal project, say a tomb, a temple, or a statue, the size of a mountain you serve with divine joy. At least that's what the state says. You say it too because pretending you re-honored to carve. Stone for 14 hours a day is safer than the alternative, and don't even think about rebellion pharaohs crush uprisings faster than you can say. Dynasty, just ask the last village that tried to withhold taxes. Oh wait, you can't, it no longer exists. So yes, the pharaoh is divine, and you're just lucky to be allowed to sweat in his name. Now get back to work. If you thought surviving under the sun was hard, just wait until you realize that in ancient Egypt, sand is your roommate, co-worker, seasoning, and mortal enemy. It's everywhere. In your clothes, in your bed, in your food. There is no escaping it. Could be working, praying, sleeping, or minding your own business in the market, and suddenly a gust of hot wind sweeps by and turns your face into a grainy exfoliation experiment you didn't ask for. Let's start with the clothes. You wear linen, it's light, breathable, and it slides down your tunic, clings to you, about as effective at keeping sand out as a screen door is at holding back soup. Every loaf of bread is basically a sand trap, since flour was skin and somehow finds its way into places you didn't know had creases. Eating good luck ground between stone slabs, little bits of grit made their way into the dough. Egyptians didn't just eat their wheat, they ate their millstones too. It's why, and if you thought your house, your floors are covered your most. Ancient dental remains are often worn flat like river rocks. Imagine chewing your breakfast while also filing your MERS. Daily was a sand-free zone, think again. Your mud brick home has gaps, crevices, and windows. Then there are sandstorms with no glass. Perfect portals for wind-blown sand. Cooking pots are full. Your bed is basically a sand pit disguised as furniture, shoes, optional at best. Egyptians walked barefoot, meaning you're always one step away from turning your feet into battered leather sandals. If you do have footwear, it's usually a basic pair of sandals made from reeds, fashionable perhaps. Protective, not remotely, Egypt's version of a slap from the gods, sudden swirling, blinding, one moment. You re-talking to a friend, the next you re-spitting dust and feeling like someone dumped an entire beach into your all dictated by gods, who seem to have very specific opinions, eye sockets. Visibility drops to zero and everyone around you turns into vaguely coughing silhouettes, and short sand is the roommate who never leaves the spice. In every meal, and the silent enemy of your eyes, lungs, and dignity, it's not just the backdrop of your life, it's part of your body now, and no, you can't wash it off. Your daily routine revolves around pleasing them. You already tried in the Nile, which is probably full of more sand, and before meals, you offer a bit of food to the gods before. Ancient Egypt religion isn't just a weekend activity. It is the operating system for everything. Your job, your diet, your hygiene routine, your bedtime rituals. First, understand this. The gods are everywhere. Your town has temples too. Speaking of the afterlife, ancient Egyptians took it very seriously. Even funerals are a dozen different deities, each responsible for some vital function. There's Re, who pilots the sun across the sky like it's a divine Uber. This headed god of wisdom is in charge of scribes and moon calendars. Sobek, part crocodile, part nightmare fuel, guards the Nile and Bastet. The cat goddess basically runs public relations. Forget personal freedom. Wake up, thank Rai, spill some beer, apologize to Heather, stub your toe, curse quietly, or risk attracting a spirit with a grudge. Bed you pray that Set, god of chaos, doesn't toss your house into existential disarray. Overnight, just do and expect it. You about to be healed with a combination of spells, herbs, and sheer multi-day affairs where the deceased must pass tests. Avoid demons and prove they were morally decent or risk eternal. First, you will be taken to a doctor, and to be fair, they were some of the most advanced in the ancient world. Because in Eurasia, you're re-given a pus made of honey. Honey actually is antibacterial, and mold has to just die and move on. You must pass a judgment process involving your heart being weighed against a feather of truth. If your heart's heavier because of lies, cruelty, or maybe stealing someone's goat, you're eaten by a mit, a creature with the head of a crocodile, the body of a lion. It as your job description, your insurance plan, and your travel itinerary for the have a headache. You might get a dose and the legs of your worst nightmare. So yes, even in death, you're still on probation, but here's the twist. This complex belief system isn't depressing, but there is no anesthesia, just it happens sometimes. It's comforting. Egyptians believed life was part of a cosmic balance. And if you followed the rituals and upheld Mahat, the principle of truth and order, you had a chance at a peaceful eternity complete, with food, family, and maybe a boat. Of course, the richer you were, the more gods. Dentistry, not great, seemed to notice you. Temples were massive, priests were powerful peasants. Well, they just hoped the gods were feeling generous that day in ancient Egypt. Faith is an optional next life, so you've stepped on something sharp, got bit by something weird, or caught something contagious, which in ancient Egypt is basically Tuesday. Time to seek medical care, waiting room, or a sterile environment optimism. They had surgical tools, medical texts, and a decent understanding of anatomy, but here as the catch science in ancient Egypt always came with a heavy dose of magic moldy bread and crushed herbs. Early penicillin properties, so it works sort of, but before applying it, the healer will chant a protective spell just to be safe. Because you never know when your stomach cramps are actually the result of a spiteful ghost or an angry god of crushed onions rubbed into your scalp while someone recites a hymn to the let's smear cow dung mixed with dates on your chest and see what happens. Eye infection, time for a paste of lizard blood, ochre, and beer, plus a prayer to Horus surgery. Abscesses were drained, bones were set, and wounds were stitched with linen thread, sharp knife, and a friend to hold. Your shoulders down while you scream into a mud brick pillow. Remember all that sand and the bread. Your teeth are worn down by your 20s. If one gets infected, your options are 1, live with it, 2, die from it, or 3, have it. And let's not forget the amulets. Whether pulled with something resembling pliers made by a blacksmith with low standards, you're giving birth, getting stitched up, or just sneezing too loud, a good doctor. So yes, Egyptian medicine had its moments, but mostly priests will probably hang a charm around your neck, just in case the real issue is an invisible serpent spirit curled around your spleen. You better believe in the gods, because your band-aid is literally a prayer. Here's a plot twist most people do and expect. Ancient Egyptian women had more rights than many women in later civilizations. They could own property, run businesses, file for divorce, and even sounds progressive, right? But before you pack your bags for take, a man to court a time-trained girl boss vacation hold up. Because while the legal status might impress you, the day-to-day reality not so glamorous. If you're a woman in ancient Egypt, you probably wake up before sunrise, you're grinding grain by hand using a giant flat stone that chews through both wheat and your spine. Then it is off to haul water from the Nile, cook breakfast, care for children, manage the household, feed animals, and if needed, help in the fields. You're a one-woman workforce in linen. There's no me time, no spa days, and definitely no maternity leave. Childbirth is risky, and the sun scorches your skin, the sand grinds. Painful midwives are helpful, sure, but there are no epidurals, no disinfectant. You give birth in a hot room with if and no push playlists featuring relaxing harps and sense prayers, and hopefully not too much bleeding. Let's talk fashion. Linen dresses are light and breathable, but there is no underwear and no shoes into everything, and the bugs think you're an all-you-can-eat buffet. Want. Now, if you're really lucky enough to be born into a wealthy family, things are makeup great Egyptian. Women did wear cosmetics, but it's lead-based and applied with sticks that look suspiciously like toothpicks. You made it through another grueling day in ancient Egypt better. You might read, write, manage estate accounts, or become a priestess. You're born royal. You could even become pharaoh, like Hatshepsut or Cleopatra, who ruled with brilliance and terrifying eyeliner. But if you're poor, your status, because in ancient Egypt, it is just the beginning of an incredibly bureaucratic. Here may be legal, but your reality is physical. You work, sweat, bend, carry birth, bury and pray. You're not chained by law, but by survival. Still, Egyptian women had agency, and that mattered. They could speak in court, keep their inheritance, and didn't become property when they married. Compared to many ancient societies, that's huge. So, yes, Egyptian women had rights, but comfort that's reserved for statues and goddesses. Not the woman elbow deep in dough while swatting flies off a toddler. You ate your gritty bread, hold your buckets, avoided divine wrath, and maybe even dodged a sandstorm. Time to relax, right, wrong. One wrong confession, one forgotten. No afterlife, no second chances, just eternal Enter Amit, part lion, part crocodile. If you do pass, your real test begins after you die. Death isn't the end. Multifaceted journey through the underworld. And if you thought the labor overseer was strict, wait until you meet the gods of judgment. First, your soul takes a trip to the Hall of Mahat before a tribunal of 42 deities. You must proclaim your innocence in what is basically the oldest legal deposition in one curse word, one unpaid. History, you say things like, I did not steal, I did not lie, I did not covet my neighbor's donkey. All while hoping the gods buy it. Then comes the heart test. Literally, your heart, believed to be the seat of the soul, is placed on a scale opposite the feather matat, the symbol of truth, justice, and balance. If your heart is heavier than the feather, well, that means you lived a wicked life. Part hippo, all terrifying. She doesn't arrest you, she doesn't find you. She eats your soul, destroying it forever non-existence, which in a culture obsessed with eternity is the ultimate punishment, and it gets better. You can doom yourself not just by actions, but by words lined during your judgment, and boom. Spiritual obliteration, it's like an open book test, where failure means getting devoured by a mythological death hybrid. Congratulations. You get to enter the field of reeds, a peaceful, idealized version of Egypt, where your soul lives forever with boats, with crops, with family, and presumably with fewer sand fleas. But the stakes enormous. That's why Egyptians obsessed over tomb preparation. Funeral rites and magical texts like the Book of the Dead, a spiritual cheat sheet full of prayer spells and hopeful tips. Like, don't insult the crocodile god. So, yes, the afterlife might be beautiful, but only if you live your life very carefully. Temple tax. And your next stop is lunch for. Amit, sleep tight. If there's one small mercy in ancient Egypt, it's this linen, blessed, breathable linen. Your entire wardrobe and everyone else's is made from this plant-based fabric. It's light, cool, and lets your skin breathe in the scorching heat. That's the good news. The bad news, that's pretty much where the comfort ends. Whether you're a farmer, builder, priest, or vendor, you're wearing the same outfit every day. For men, short white kilt or loincloth. For women, a straight sleeveless linen dress, sometimes held up by straps, sometimes not. If you're upper class, you might have pleat or beads or fancy patterns. If you're not, it's plain white or slightly grayish, depending on how long it's been since. Laundry day, oh, and laundry day. Your hand scrubbing your clothes in the Nile while hoping a hippo doesn't emerge. Mid-art, most people go barefoot. Sandals made from woven reeds or leather are reserved for special occasions or temple priests. So unless you're royalty, expect to spend your days with hot sand between your toes and possibly a sharp rock in your heel accessories. Absolutely, but mostly functional amulets for protection. Necklaces to show status and eye makeup made from powdered coal, which was in just for fashion. It helped reduce glare from the sun and supposedly warded off infections. Yes, even eyeliner had a job in ancient Egypt. But no matter how well you dress, the bugs don't care. Flies, gnats, mosquitoes. They treat your airy outfit as an invitation. You're walking, and of course your outfit. Through the day, swatting constantly, rubbing on perfumed oils, and praying that your linen doesn't stick to you like a wet curtain the moment the sun reaches full strength. Doesn't change with the seasons because Egypt doesn't really have seasons, just hot and slightly less hot. But don't let the breezy outfits fool you, because no matter how floaty. So your linen ensemble is basically your year-round uniform, whether it's 110 or a chilly 70 evening. So yes, Egyptian clothing was light, elegant, and far more comfortable than what Romans would wear later. Your tunic feels your life is still heavy with labor heat, sand, and bugs that refuse to respect your personal space. You've survived another blistering Egyptian day, hauling bricks, dodging sandstorms, and praying your linen doesn't disintegrate mid-task. But in ancient Egypt, survival is always temporary, because no matter how tough you are, you probably won't live past 35. Let's break it down. If you make it past childhood, which is already an achievement considering if you get a fever, the best treatment is infant. Mortality rates were sky high. You're thrust straight into adulthood by age 13. They planned for it. In fact, they planned for it better then, but here as the twist Egyptians were end. Marriage, work, and child rearing all start early because, honestly, you'll be running out of time. You might die from heat stroke or an infected cut or childbirth or crocodiles or scorpion stings. Your body is your bad bread, and forget antibiotics. Honey herbs and hoping the gods do and have other plans for your soul scared of death. Most people plan for retirement today. If you're rich, you commission a tomb, the ancient version of a 5-star eternity suite. You start saving up grave goods, jewelry, food offerings, perfume statues, even tiny servant dolls called Shabaptis. To do your chores in the afterlife, think of them as spiritual interns who work while you nap forever. No murals, no. Embalmed, wrapped in linen, stuffed with matron natural salt, and tucked neatly into a painted sarcophagus. You're reburied with a copy of the Book of the Dead, which is less about doom and more like a mystical travel guide, complete with passwords for the afterlife spells to confuse demons. But even the poorest Egyptians held on to instructions for not getting eaten by soul-devouring monsters. If you're poor, let's start with a simple truth. Tombs are full of expensive stuff, gold amulets. Well, your tomb is likely a shallow pit in the sand. Your body is wrapped in whatever fabric your family can spare, maybe a pot or two placed nearby and then covered with earth. All intended to be taken into the afterlife because in Golden Mask, just you and the wind, the dream of the afterlife, a peaceful, fertile paradise called the Field of Reeds, where you farm without sweat, eat without hunger, and sail the Nile forever under gentle sunlight. So yes, you'll probably die young in ancient Egypt, but if you lived well, prayed right, and didn't insult too many jackal-headed gods, you just might spend eternity in style. You finally made in it to the afterlife, or at least into the tomb. You've been embalmed, wrapped, blessed, and buried time to rest in peace, right? Well, not exactly, but considering how ancient Egypt, even the dead get robbed, where especially gold and rare incense, the risk often seemed. Jewelry, perfumed oils, carved statues, chests full of linens, and for pharaohs, literal boatloads of treasure. But treasure in a tomb is basically an open invitation for someone with a chisel and bad intentions. Tomb robbery was so common that it became a full-time problem. Pharaohs tried to fight it by hiding their tombs deep in cliffs, locking them behind trap doors, and scrawling terrifying curses on the walls. Things like, "May a crocodile devour your soul," or "May your limbs be twisted forever by a serpent made of fire." Spoiler, the curses didn't work. Grave robbers came anyway at night in secret with inside knowledge. Sometimes they were locals. Sometimes they were corrupt workers who helped build the tombs. Some cases, even priests and guards were in on it, and the punishment for getting caught severe. Think public beatings, mutilation, exile, or death. Valuable tomb goods worth it. After all, the dead don't fight back, but it's not just the wealthy who got robbed. Even commoners' graves were disturbed. Poor Egyptians might have been buried with a small pot of beer or a loaf of bread for the afterlife. That was still worth stealing. Food was scarce, tools were valuable, and linen was currency. The irony? Tomb robbing wasn't just about greed. Sometimes it was about survival. Egypt went through famines, political treasure, but for so collapse and invasions, a hungry worker might break into a tomb not for Food, and when your children are starving, a few funeral offerings look less like sacred objects and more like dinner rest. In an ancient Egypt, you re not safe just because you re dead. Your tomb can be looted, your name erased, and your mummy and tombs. Birds' eyes, snakes' lotus flowers, unwrapped by some desperate soul, with a pickaxe and poor moral judgment. Peace, only if no one knows where you're buried. We've all seen them. Some symbols represent entire words. And don't expect spaces majestic. Mysterious carvings on the walls of temples, men walking sideways like they're on a fashion runway. Ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs, visually stunning and insanely difficult to learn. Sure, the ancient Egyptian writing was basically one long, beautiful riddle. If they re-facing right, re-right, facing look cool, but try reading them, hieroglyphs weren't just decorative art. They were a full-blown writing system with over 700 characters and growing. Others are sounds and many are determinatives, which clarify meaning, but the payoff huge. The trick look, because, writing the word star with an actual star symbol might be too straightforward. And protected from most manual labor, an I or punctuation with artistic flair, 0 vowels, and a deep need for context. Oh, and it can be. Literally, hieroglyphs were believed to have sacred, for the written left to right, right to left, or top to bottom, depending on what the scribe felt like. That day, at which way the birds or people are facing, that as your reading direction. Would you survive a single day in ancient Egypt? Let us be honest. Probably not sure. Left, read left. And if they're upside down, good luck. Learning to write hieroglyphs wasn't for commoners. Literacy was rare. Maybe 1% of the population could actually read and write. If you wanted and you had to become a scribe, which meant years of intense, you walked barefoot on blazing sand, hauled water cooked over. Your average Egyptian day started with a dirt floor, a cloud of flies, and education starting as a child. You'd memorize hundreds of symbols, copy endless scrolls, and practice so much that your hand probably curled into a claw by age 15. Scribes were respected wealth and never made to haul bricks under the sun. Instead, they wrote tax records, court documents, letters, and religious texts. Promotions, no career changes, no finding. They were essential to society. You were either a scribe, a farmer, a laborer, a mother, a servant, or a world where writing was power. Scribes ruled quietly from the shadows. Rest of the population, though, writing was something magical, but for a modern person without your air, once you power. Writing someone's name preserved their soul, erasing it total spiritual. And if you were lucky, maybe 2 changes of annihilation. So yeah, spelling really mattered. So while hieroglyphs may look like ancient emoji, they're more like a linguistic Rubik's Cube wrapped in myth, math, and mystery. Beautiful, yes. Easy to learn, absolutely not. After 14 chapters of heat, hunger, sand, superstition, and backbreaking labor, it is time to ask the big question. It's easy to romanticize the ancient world, golden tombs, lotus-scented air, graceful hieroglyphs, gods with animal heads, and a thing for order and beauty, the stone serpent heads, but unlike most temples. But behind the iconic monuments and stunning art was a world of brutal realities that spared no one but the... It feels elite, the knowledge that if you didn't work, you didn't eat. Open fires lived shoulder to shoulder with bugs, smoke, and livestock. You worried about disease, divine punishment, and whether a snake might slither into your sleeping mat. You had no toothpaste, no medicine, no retirement plan linen. You served a god king who could take your land with a decree, a climate that cooked your skin by noon, and a religion that required you to pass a literal divine test after death just to get into the good version of the afterlife. Let's also not forget the things you didn't have. No antibiotics, no sunscreen, no privacy, no plumbing, no painkillers, and no easy escape were born into your class. That was it. Know yourself dead, and yet for all this, the ancient Egyptians weren't miserable. They believed deeply in their gods, their purpose, and the beauty of life. They loved music, dance, food, family, and festivals. They joked, they painted. They imagined eternity with enough clarity to build stone monuments that still stand today, conditioning your filtered water, your Advil, your sneakers, and your smartphone you'd fold before the second sandstorm hit. So no, you wouldn't last a day in ancient Egypt. But that's okay because they lasted thousands of years. And maybe, just maybe, that's why we still talk about them. In the heart of ancient Teotihuacan, one pyramid refuses to be forgotten. Its surface is adorned not with peaceful symbols of faith or gentle gods, but with snarling, open-mouthed stone serpents, dozens of them. They jet out from the temple's facade as if frozen in mid-strike fangs, bared eyes wide. This is the temple of the feathered serpent, known to many as the temple of Quetzalcoatl, that reach for the sky with reverence. This one feels different, predatory. From the moment you approach it, there is an eerie sense that you are being watched. Aren't mere decoration, they were warnings, symbols of divine wrath, and beneath their gaze, something horrific once unfolded. Excavations over the past few decades have revealed something that archaeologists didn't expect hidden beneath the temple's base were not just ceremonial offerings, but something far more disturbing: human remains, and not a handful. Over 200 bodies, many of them decapitated hands bound behind their backs. Young men, warriors, perhaps buried in groups, ritual sacrifices arranged with mathematical precision. Some were buried with obsidian knives at their sides, others with necklaces made of human teeth or jewelry crafted from jawbones they weren't simply thrown into the ground. They were deliberately placed in positions of symbolic significance. It's clear this was no mass grave. It was a message, a divine transaction carved into stone and sealed with blood. But what kind of belief system justifies such horror, who demanded so many lives be taken at once? The Temple of the Feathered Serpent wasn't just a religious building, it was a theater of power, a place where rulers fused cosmology, warfare, and fear to maintain control over a city of more than 100,000 souls, and this ritual bloodletting may have been the cost of keeping the cosmos in balance. You were looking into the eyes of a civilization that believed the gods needed blood, and that they had. But who were these people who commanded such violence? As you stand before this temple today, gazing at those stone serpents, you're not just looking at art or architecture. Every right to deliver it and vanished without a trace. The answer lies in the shadows of Teotihuacan, before the mighty Aztec Empire, before the Maya carved their cosmic calendar. And when you walk its immense avenue of the dead, flanked by pyramids that scrape the heavens, you start to. It was a city meticulously. Its name, given by the later Aztecs, means the place where gods were into stone. There stood a city unlike any other in the ancient America's Teotihuacan, the Pyramid of the Moon, the Pyramid of the Born. Understand why. At its height, around 100 to 250 CE, Teotihuacan was a sprawling, we don't even know what they called themselves there, metropolis of over 100,000 people, making it one of the largest cities in the world at the time, rivaling ancient Rome, Alexandria, and Chang'an in size and influence plant-wide. Boulevards, gridded streets, apartment compounds, housing extended a theocracy or something altogether, families, multi-story structures made from volcanic stone, and at the center of it all, 3 massive pyramids. Sun and the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. But here's what makes Teotihuacan different. No one knows who built it. Seriously, to this day, we don't. They were tools of control aligning perfectly with astronomical. But how to know the name of the people who constructed this place? Are no written records, no king's names carved into stone. Teotihuacan seems to a statecraft have been a society ruled not by a single monarch, but perhaps by a council foreign to our understanding of ancient power. And despite this anonymity, they're but in Teotihuacan centuries before and at the heart. To understand the temple, you must first understand the influence was colossal. Evidence of Teotihuacan's power has been found hundreds of miles away from the Maya cities of Tekal and Copan to the distant Zapotec capital of Monte Alban. Obsidian blades, ceramic styles, murals, and even political meddling in one case. Walking chaos and order was to create something entirely cosmic, something emissaries. May have helped overthrow a local Maya king to install a ruler more favorable to their interests. They maintained such a vast network. How did a city with no known writing system command such authority across Mesoamerica? The answer may lie in how they combined cosmic ideology. Their temples were more than places of worship events, serving as theaters of ritual sacrifice and reminding every citizen, either way they are, and every visitor that Teotihuacan was no ordinary city. It was the axis of the world, a sacred engine that kept time, fate, and blood flowing in sync. And Quetzalcoatl, the leader of it all, stood the temple of the feathered serpent deity. It was dedicated to the feathered serpent, known later by the Aztecs as Quetzal, and to the Maya as Culcan. This figure is one of the most enigmatic gods in all of Mesoamerican mythology. The Aztecs rose to power. The feathered serpent was already a central, possibly supreme divine force. But here's the paradox. What kind of god is both a serpent and a bird? Think about that. Serpents slither through the underworld. They shed their skin, symbolizing rebirth, duality, and death. Birds soar high in the sky, closer to the sun, representing freedom, divinity, and life-giving wind. To combine these two, earthbound and sky-dwelling death and life, terrifyingly powerful. The feathered serpent wasn't just a god. He was a bridge between worlds. On the facade of the temple, carved in deep relief, we see dozens of his images: goggle eyes, bared teeth, plumed headdresses. Some historians believe these represent the god himself. Others suggest they're warriors or priestly figures adorned in divine regalia to signal their authority everywhere. The temple is covered in these snakebird hybrids, as if the structure itself breathes with divine presence. But the feathered serpent wasn't just a god of the heavens. He was intimately tied to sacrifice. Blood was the fuel that kept the cosmos in motion. Remembered as a gentle, civilizing deity, had a much darker role in Teotihuacan. He demanded offerings, and not just of maize or incense, but of life itself. In some myths, he descended into the underworld to retrieve the bones of the dead and create humankind. But to bring life from death, there had to be a trade. The gods sacrificed themselves for humanity, and humans in return were expected to do the same. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent wasn't just a monument to faith. It was a cosmic engine designed to link the sky, the earth, and the underworld through ritual. Every stone, every serpent head, every buried victim fed into that system. Teotihuacan didn't just worship the feathered serpent. They embodied his logic, paradox, power, and blood, and the locals whispered legends, scholars made guesses, but no one could have. Most disturbing truths were hidden beneath the surface. For centuries, the Temple of the Feathered Serpent stood silently, a weathered, imposing structure, half swallowed by time, imagined what was buried beneath its layered stones. Until archaeologists broke through in the late 1980s and early 2000s, what they found wasn't just unexpected, it was unsettling. Hidden beneath the temple's foundations were a series of long-sealed chambers and pits, each filled with carefully arranged human remains. These weren't the messy results of war or disease. These were deliberate sacrifices, systematic, ritualistic, cold. The victims numbering. Some were necklaces made of human. Over 200 were young men, many between 15 and 25 jawbones. Others had their hands tied behind their backs. A few were decapitated, obsidian knives sharp, and the arrangement of the bodies followed geometric and symbolic patterns. Offerings surrounded the victims, black as night, were scattered nearby, the unmistakable tools of ritual slaughter. And this is where it gets darker, the terotonos, It was as if every stone had to be consecrated with. They weren't buried randomly. They were placed in quadrants, cardinal directions. The deeper you possibly to mirror the cosmos, even the number of bodies mattered. It wasn't just about death. It was about meaningful death. The floor glimmered like jaguar bones, serpents, exotic shells from the distant Gulf Coast figurines, and Was this a symbolic passage to the land of the dead, a mirror of the night obsidian blades that had never been used in battle? This wasn't punishment, it was a gift. These young men, most likely warriors, had been selected not to die in disgrace, but to die as part of something transcendent. The very act of building a temple may have required human sacrifice. Blood, every layer raised only after an offering had been made, dig the more sacrifice you find in one chamber. Archaeologists discovered elaborate tunnels filled with mercury and Mysica materials associated with the underworld. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent sits directly along this avenue, walking at water when Venus rose or set wars were. Sky, the more they excavated, the more it felt like the temple was not built on top of death, but constructed to encase it. The blood didn't stain the stone by accident. The stone was meant to hold the blood, and all of it was for the gods. Some suggest the temple lines up with the equinox. Look closer at the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, and you'll notice something strange, something the walls were once. Unnerving, it doesn't just sit on the landscape, it aligns with the universe. To walk through it would be like combined with Mercury. Teotihuacan wasn't built randomly. The entire city was laid out along precise cosmic axes. Its central avenue of the dead runs at a 15 angle off true north, not a mistake. Even was this temple not just a place of sacrifice, but a cosmic machine, but a deliberate shift, possibly to align with the setting of the Pleiad star cluster or the sun on specific ritual dates into a grand celestial blueprint. But why? What were they trying to align with? Archaeologists and arcosters have debated this for decades. Sunrise. Others argue it connects to Venus, the planet most sacred to Mesoamerican civilizations, often associated with war, sacrifice, and rebirth. It was trying to speak to them. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent wasn't just a declared offerings made and temples. Activated with ritual, fire temples dimensions seem intentional. The repetition of the number 7, the number of visible planetary bodies, appears in its step platforms. Their symmetry, rhythm, and a stunning understanding of both earthly math and cosmic cycles, and beneath the surface, more clues. In 2003, archaeologists uncovered a tunnel beneath the temple. Not a crude passage, but a deliberately constructed subterranean world covered in powdered paille, a shimmering mineral that would have reflected light like starlight pools and microlined walls. The tunnel seemed designed to replicate the cosmos itself. Traveling through the Milky Way, a symbolic journey to the underworld, or perhaps to rebirth portal that aligned Earth sky and the spirit realm. Some scholars believe Teoti saw time as circular, not linear. Every ritual, every building, every sacrifice wasn't a one-time event. It was part of an eternal cycle, death leading to renewal, sacrifice, fueling rebirth. The temple's alignments may have helped predict celestial movements, coordinate harvests, and more importantly, time when to offer blood. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent wasn't just looking at the stars. Spiritual beacon, it was a political weapon. Its very design was meant to overwhelm, to intimidate, to remind every viewer, local or foreign, who held the reins of power in Teotihuacan. Imagine standing in its shadow 1,800 years ago. You, a visitor from a smaller city-state, would arrive at the Avenue of the Dead, already eric by the sheer scale of Teotihuacan. But when you reached the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, you'd freeze. The serpent heads stare at you, their fangs bared jaguar symbols growl from the stone. The plaza had once held massive gatherings, not just for celebration, but for public ritual, and nothing stirs. You might even witness a sacrifice. The ruling elite of Teotihuacan understood something crucial: fear is power. Fear like divine wrath. By orchestrating ritual executions in broad daylight, surrounded by cosmic symbols and death imagery, they sent a clear message: gods are with us, and we are not afraid to feed them. But this wasn't chaos, this was theater. Priests in feathered headdresses and obsidian masks would chant, dance, and spill blood, turning cosmic myth into political performance. It wasn't just about pleasing the gods. It was about reminding everyone watching that the city's rulers had direct access to the people looked up at the gods, at the rulers, at the sacrifices and divine. They alone could open the heavens or summon rain, protect the people, or destroy their enemies. Even the architecture helped reinforce this propaganda from the temple's upper tiers. In a world where gods ruled through fear, Teotihuacan position leaders could look down upon the plaza. They controlled not just the narrative, but the very physical space in which it unfolded. But around the year 550 CE, something broke, and the silence that followed was as knew their place, and for outsiders, Teotihuacan didn't need to conquer with swords, it conquered with symbols. Visiting dignitaries would carry home tales of awe and terror. They would speak of the feathered serpents, the endless avenues, the blood rituals that lit the signs that the cosmic engine was faltering. Evidence points to a long sky red, and then came the fire. Archaeologists have uncovered widespread the very systems that had itself as their chosen mouthpiece, and the Temple of the Feathered Serpent was the loudest voice of all. At its peak, Teotihuacan was the heartbeat of Mesoamerica, a city of fire and stone of gods and blood, a city that seemed destined to last forever. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent, once a symbol of divine authority, was something changed. Chilling as the temple's stone serpent heads, the fall of Teotihuacan was not loud and glorious. It was gradual, then sudden. Signs of strain began appearing decades earlier. Period of drought, crop failure, and social unrest sustained this grand city's centralized power. Religious dominance, cosmic order. They named it Teotihuacan, the place where gods were born. They built their own myths around. Began to crack under pressure. The great rituals stopped. The ruling elite disappeared. The temple now burned layers across elite compounds, temples, and administrative buildings, including signs of violent destruction. And yet the mystery only deepened because, while the city faded for over 1,000 years, the Temple of the Feathered Serpent lay buried beneath layers of dust volcanic. At the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, what's strange is that the lower-S residential areas were mostly untouched. To them, the Temple of the Feathered Serpent was not a ruin. In the early 20th century, Mexican archaeologists began. What they found was astonishing, perfectly engineered. It was a relic of divine truth. This wasn't an external invasion. This was an uprising, a rebellion possibly. From within, the very people who once watched sacrifices in awe may have risen against. It had been deliberately closed off nearly 1 to 800 years earlier, as if to. One of the most dramatic discoveries came in 2011 when researchers uncovered a sealed tunnel. Their priest kings ransacked, sculptures were defaced, fires were set, ritual spaces were desecrated. And then silence. Teotihuacan wasn't completely abandoned after years of excavation scientists overnight, but it lost its soul. Trade networks collapsed, artistic production ceased longer, spoke, its memory endured. Centuries later, the Aztecs arrived in the Valley of Mexico and stumbled upon its ruins. They were Eric. They believed gods had built this place, its pyramids, revering it as sacred ground, even as they had no idea who its original builders were. But the irony remains. The most powerful city of its time, built on cosmic order and blood, vanished without a written word, without a final record, leaving behind only stone and questions. The gods, it seemed, had gone quiet, ash and silence. Locals avoided it, farmers tilled around it, and the world forgot it until the modern age of archaeology arrived and cracked open the secrets buried within its heart, excavating. Teotihuacan City, far older than the Aztecs, but it wasn't until the 1980s and 2000s that the temple itself began to yield its most intimate and most chilling revelations. Beneath the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, prevent anyone from entering ever again. Unearthed, a cosmic corridor, a symbolic underworld, lined with pyite to mimic a starlit sky, pools of liquid mercury, and thousands of ritual objects, jade statues, rubber balls, obsidian blades, and even carved wooden masks. It felt less like a Why would the ancient builders go to such lengths? What were they trying? Others tomb and more like a message to preserve or hide. Some experts believe the tunnel was used in initiation rituals, the Mercury ones. Suggest it symbolized the creation of the world, a mythological womb where gods were born, where kings were made, where the feathered serpent still lingered not just as a myth, but as the divine order was negotiated between humans and the cosmos. Thought to be only toxic, may have represented water or the fluid veil between worlds. And among all these glittering fragments was one persistent whisper. Presence in murals, in carvings, in the geometry of the temple itself. But even with all our tools, one truth remains. The temple still keeps serpent hadn't disappeared. It had coiled inward deep into the bones of the city, waiting to be rediscovered. And with each excavation, each uncovered jawbone, or tourists snap photos children run past. Golden ornament, we draw a little closer to its message, one carved not in language, but in stone sacrifice and shadow. Modern science has given us X-rays, drones, and ground-penetrating radar secrets. Today, the Temple of the Fathered. Serpent stands as a haunting monument, not just to a civilization long gone, but to a way of thinking that merged power, cosmos, and death into one unbreakable system. The stone serpent heads, but the ground beneath. Their feet is soaked in 1,000 untold stories and over 200. It has become unknown human sacrifices, and still the temple endures. Its legacy is not just architectural. It's psychological, spiritual, cultural. The feathered serpent, it asks hard questions. How far? Go to feel connected to the divine. What happens when power and religion become indistinguishable? Would be adopted paradoxical god of sky and earth continued to evolve. He that civilizations can soar to impossible heights while in many ways. The temple isn't just a historical site, it is a mirror, by the Toltecs, then reborn by the Aztecs as Quetzalcoatl, where his myth took on. A gentler tone, the bringer of knowledge, the god who wept for humanity, the one who vowed to return. This reimagining of the serpent god shows how myths don't die, they transform. Even in modern Mexico, echoes of the feathered serpent persist in art and murals and literature and in national identity. The temple's image has appeared on coin stamps and even government buildings. Not to strike, but to remind us of what we once were, symbol of mystery, of pre-Columbian brilliance, and of the untamed spiritual world that once pulsed through Mesoamerica. But there's another legacy, one less visible, more uncomfortable. The Temple of the Fathered. Serpent forces us to confront the price of belief, but these rudimentary drums will humans, so warned to summon. Or a celebration has begun, or the imagined tribe scattered across a dense forest. One beat from a cam beauty coexists with terror. Somewhere in that ancient repetition, something magical emerged. The reflection of us. Our fascination with life after death, our hunger for meaning, our capacity to build monuments of staggering beauty and to stain them with blood. These ancient rhythms became a language of emotion, joy, grief, warning. The temple teaches us that greatness comes with shadows, burying their secrets beneath the stones. And maybe that's why we keep returning. Because even when we had no words, we had rhythm, and that rhythm was not just to visit, but to understand. Because deep down, we know the before serpent is still watching. And what we still might be. Before we spoke in words, we spoke in rhythm, tens of thousands of years ago. Long before the invention of writing, even before the birth of language itself, early humans began to create something that could only be described as sound with intention. Not speech, not melody, but rhythm. A hand slapping hollow bark, a stick tapping a stone, a foot stomping earth in time. First drumbeat, it wasn't called music. It wasn't called anything, but it felt like something like communication, like movement. Like emotion taking form, anthropologists have uncovered evidence of primitive percussion instruments. Dating back over 30,000 years, these were likely made from natural materials, tree trunks, hollowed out gourds, stretched animal hides. Nothing fancy, nothing preserved. Were not toys or idle distractions. They served real purposes to connect distant drum, and others knew danger is coming, gods are listening. The earliest drums weren't just tools, they were extensions of the human body. A heartbeat externalized a pulse that could be felt across a valley. Drumming wasn't something you watched or listened to. It was something you participated in together around fires under stars and caves, where echoes made the air itself vibrate. Hope all expressed not in syllables or symbols, but in pattern. Sound the first flutes were carved before string instruments were dreamed of. The drum was already alive, anchoring us in time, giving shape to ritual, and uniting individuals into tribes. In that way, the drum became humanity's first instrument, and perhaps its first form of collective identity. No matter where on earth people lived, they created something to strike, something to beat, something to mark the moment. Everything in the cradle of early human civilization. Drums were not just instruments, they were sacred voices. Every tribe, every culture, But the purpose was nearly universal: to commune with the corner of the earth, developed its own rhythm, unseen. In Africa, where some of the world's earliest drums emerged, rhythm was deeply intertwined with life, death, and ancestry. The gam, carved from a single tree and wrapped in goatskin, was believed to contain three spirits. That of the tree, it was carved from the animal whose skin gave it voice, and the craftsman who brought it to life. Played in circles, the gem didn't just accompany rituals, it was the ritual. Then there were the talking drums, capable of mimicking human speech through pitch and tone from one village to the next. Long before the telephone, humans were already across the oceans, native. In West Africa, it was the heartbeat of Mother Earth, played in ceremonies to these drums. Carried messages across miles, relaying news, warnings, births and deaths, drumming their messages through the landscape. American tribes treated the drum as a living entity, honor ancestors, summon healing, or guide the souls of the dead. The large POW drum, played by a circle of drummers, was both a musical and spiritual engine. To drum was to remember, to, in Australia, the Aboriginal. No sheet music, no stage, a communal pulse that aligned humans with nature and spirit in the Arctic. Inuit shamans struck frame drums to enter trance states, seeking visions or communicating. People used clapsticks and percussive stomps in the sacred dream time, a mythic era of an empires. Drums transformed into tools of domination, instruments of creation with spirits during long dark winters. These weren't performances, these were these drums with a single resonant. In Mesopotamia, temple drums were acts of survival, healing, storytelling, and connection. Drum was to belong. If you heard a drum in the distance, you knew, and always it was communal. Drums brought people together into sacred circles, synchronizing hearts and intentions. But no army wielded drums quite like the just bodies, moving hands, striking souls, stirring, all unified by rhythm. It didn't matter where on earth you stood, something sacred was happening, something that words alone could never express. European accounts described soldiers freezing in panic before even seeing the Ottomans. From sacred circles to bloody battlefields, the drum has always spoken, sometimes with comfort and sometimes with command. As human societies evolved into kingdoms, order, and weapons of fear, the earliest armies didn't have radios or megaphones. They had drums, and the drum, even under oppression, refused to be. Ancient China, massive drums called bao were struck to coordinate troops across vast terrains. Boom commanders could signal a charge, retreat, or a flanking maneuver. As civilizations branched out across continents, so too did their rhythms. Weren't just loud, they were strategic. Each rhythm meant something specific, and trained soldiers knew how to listen even through the chaos of battle. On plantations, rhythmic. Two worlds, two paths, one. But it was more used to announce rulers and summon the public. But in times of conflict, it was conversation. Each stroke had a name, echoed through city walls, terrifying enemies with a deep, relentless thunder. So whether it signaled divine right, military discipline, or raw fear, the drummers moved with martial precision. Their stances in Japan, the Dao drum, emerged as it wasn't just percussion, it was psychological warfare, When the Romans marched, they brought with them the tympanum, a frame drum used in processions and by cults like that of Cybele, though not a battlefield instrument in the way horns and standards were it, carried symbolic power, a sound of empire discipline and order. Ottomans, their Matab, bands the world's first known military. Orchestras unleashed an overwhelming storm of drums, cymbals, and horns before battles. The relentless pounding of cursed giant kettle drums and davul, double-headed bass drums struck terror into the hearts of enemy forces. Some paralyzed by sound, drums also enforced power off the battlefield. In royal courts across Asia, Africa, and Europe, drum ensembles announced arrivals, marked coronations, and underscored political rituals. To beat a drum was to declare power is present. Even enslaved people in the Americas used drums as tools of resistance communication, kept culture alive, and helped orchestrate secret rebellions. Silence. The drum has always carried a message. This is who rules. This is who marches. And this is the rhythm of power evolving in form, purpose, and philosophy. In the East, drums became tools of precision, spirituality, and ceremony. In the West, they leaned into military power and eventually orchestral grandeur. Heartbeat. In India, the drum became a sacred instrument of divine. Language table, with its crisp tones and fluid grace, was used in classical music and devotional performances. Then accompaniment, meaning a syllabic identity. Indian drumming wasn't just percussive, it was spoken poetry trained over decades. The table player was not just a musician, he was a linguist of rhythm, a ceremonial giant, played in Shinto rituals, theater, and war Dao. Required not just technical skill, but physical discipline. Machines rise the physicality of a live drum kit. The sticks, the skins, the sweat remains irreplaceable. It's a symbol of modern rhythm, a fusion of centuries where tradition meets innovation and where one drummer can speak with 10 voices at once. The world beats in thousands of dialects, and so do its drums, from continent to continent. Culture to culture, the drum has taken countless forms, each carrying a distinct identity, sound, and purpose. These aren't just instruments, they're cultural. Its signatures crafted from local materials, shaped by local hands, and steeped in the rhythms of everyday life. In West Africa, the dja remains a heartbeat of community gatherings. Speaks in sharp slaps and deep bass tones designed for storytelling and spontaneous conversation. Next. To it, the dandan provides the foundational pulse, a rhythmic anchor around which others can dance. In Africa, a drum ensemble isn't just music, it's a conversation between in the middle. East, the dabuka, a spirit's ancestors and the living. Goblet-shaped drum made from clay or metal delivers crisp, fast-paced rhythms essential to belly dancing and classical. Arabic music, its voice is sharp and articulate, demanding precision from its player and movement from its listeners across the Caribbean and Latin. America drums tell a different story, one born from resilience and fusion. In Brazil, the thunder of Sira. Conga bongo and timbre reflect the blend of African, indigenous, and Spanish. Each influences. In Cuba, the sacred bia drums are used in Santaya rituals. Each drum speaking a divine language tied to the arishas, and Cuica drives samba parades through the streets, infusing joy into protest. Whether guiding dance, healing prayer, and carnival, their rhythms in India, the Mridangam and tablar, dominate South and North Indian classical music, respectively. These drums are so precise they are tuned to pitch, blurring the line between rhythm and melody. The physical gave way to the programmable finger. Movement matters. Each stroke carries centuries of tradition. Then there's the frame drum, one of the oldest in human history, appearing in everything from Persian daf to Irish bodhran from shamanic tools. Early devices like the two folk ensembles played with fingertips, mallets, or brushes. It's proof that even simplicity can be sacred. What unites them all-purpose. Then came in 1980. Roland released the TR-808, a drum machine so iconic it's deep. Ritual or revolution, each drum reflects the soul of its people, carry geography, history, and identity. The global drum family isn't just diverse. It was about creating new sounds entirely. As digital audio progressed, so hip hop, techno, electro, and trap, it's universal. Because no matter where you go, the earth still echoes with rhythm. As the 20th century drew to a close, the sound of drums began to change. Not in rhythm, but in texture. The sweaty palms, the wooden sticks, the calloused fingertips, all began to share. Artists could now rehearse. It was no longer about mimicking producers, started layering human played. The organic and the synthetic found a groove together space with circuits, pads, and software. The age of digital drums had arrived. It began in the 1970s with primitive drum machines. Rhythmicon and Roland CR78 that used analog circuits to simulate basic beats. At first, they sounded robotic, even awkward, but musicians saw something else: consistency, control, and endless possibility. The tools have changed, but the purpose remains the same: to move bodies. The drum remains our. Some feared this shift meant the death of traditional drumming, a replacement of revolution. It is the heartbeat we all share, not booming kick and crisp snare, would go on to define entire genres. From ancient fire circles to modern concert halls, from sacred rituals to digital, we're all born in part from its synthetic pulse. Acoustic drums did the tools, electronic drum kits like the Roland. Fat drums allowed drummers to play naturally while triggering thousands of sampled or synthesized tones. Silently record without microphones and switch drum kits with the press of a button. It speaks in, and in the quiet spaces in, the drum has been our companion. And with computers came digital audio workstations, DAWs like Ableton, FL Studio, and Logic. Now anyone with a laptop could build complex rhythms, layering kicks, snares, hi-hats, and sub-bass into vast sonic architectures, finger drumming on MIDI. Pats became an art form of its own human feel with cold precision, but that didn't happen. Instead, hybridity emerged. Acoustic drummers began integrating triggers and samples into their kits' drums with machine beats. Digital drums didn't erase the past. They reimagined it, and today we live in a world where a single person in a bedroom can build rhythms once requiring entire orchestras, where ancient grooves from Africa, Asia, and the Americas can be sampled, twisted, and given new life in neon-lit dance floors to shape. Time to make silence speak across every era, every empire, and every evolution in technology. One thing has never changed: oldest and most enduring voice dance floors. The drum has never been just about music. It's about connection to ourselves, to each other, to something bigger. Metaphorically, literally, because even before we're born, nestled in the womb, the first rhythm we ever hear is that of our mother's heart. Steady, safe, alive, and when life begins, we chase that rhythm forever through joy and war, through worship and protest. It has marched beside kings and risen with rebels. It has echoed through temples and subway tunnels. Every language, because it is a language, one that bypasses thought and speaks directly to the body, the bones, the blood. In moments of grief, we drum to mourn. In moments of ecstasy, we drum to celebrate. We drum to remember who we are. Today, percussion continues to evolve.